Welcome everyone to the second meeting of the Santa Clara Valley Urban Forestry Alliance. Woohoo! And thank you all for being here. Thank you to all of our panelists, and I'll introduce them as we go through. I just wanted to show you the agenda. So we've got about a 10-minute soft start, and I'll introduce some of the folks who are here. And after that, we'll hear from Miranda Hutton of the U.S. Forest Service. And Miranda will come to us recorded because she's in jury duty at the moment. So after that, we'll talk about these specific elements of a regional collaboration. And just a reminder, the idea for the Santa Clara Valley Urban Forestry Alliance is to form a regional collaboration that focuses on urban forestry and that focuses on all of these different aspects of urban forestry. And so today we'll talk about the outreach and education element, we'll talk about the funding element, and we'll talk about the operational element. And we have a really wonderful list of speakers, and I don't want to belabor this point too much. I'll introduce all of them as we go through. But just a reminder that this is a second part of two parts last time, and let me show you what we did last time. Last time we had there we go, August agenda. Well, this is the same agenda, isn't it? Or maybe it isn't. Which one am I sharing? Am I sharing the August agenda? Somebody nodded. Okay. So what we started with is we started with some of the more larger scale issues, namely how to value trees and also how to valuate trees, meaning how to transfer that value into actual monetary value, and how to adjust policies to account for that value and those values. And we had a really interesting discussion with John Sway of the San Francisco Planning Department on how that city transformed its urban forest policy. And then we also heard from Lydia Scott of Chicago Regional Trees Initiative. And Lydia talked to us about how to set up a regional approach to trees. So we had a local example that showed us it's possible. And then we had a very successful regional example that's been running for almost 2 decades now. And then we talked about what kind of data one would need, whether you're a small city looking to just kind of manage your trees, or whether you're looking to plug into a larger regional database and information management system. And we had a couple of different presenters who talked about data needs, and not just data needs, but what you can do with the data. And this was one of the kind of important messages. If we have a regional alliance, if we have a regional collaboration, it opens up more opportunities, including funding opportunities, to get additional data, which then each city, each municipality, each agency can use to, number one, to tell their own story, number two, to better manage their own trees, and number three, to then use all of that information to go after additional funding sources. So that's what we started with. Today, we're going to talk about how you tell that story of trees to your public and also to your officials. And we'll do that right after Miranda's keynote. Then we'll talk about how you fund this whole thing. And we heard from John Sway last time of what it takes to sort of move into a different mindset for the funding. Today, we'll hear a bit more details about how San Francisco restructured their funding. We'll also hear about some alternative funding sources, and we'll hear about what opportunities are available from the state. And again, if you're a smaller city, smaller agency, this is really where that regional approach comes in, because you might not have the capacity, or you might just not have the interest on your own to go after some of these larger funding sources. But as part of a regional initiative, that becomes much more doable. And then finally, we'll talk about operational capacity. We'll talk about what it takes to set up urban tree management. And we'll have a view sort of from the state level, we'll have a view from the municipal level, and we'll have a view from the commercial side of things. So it promises to be a great meeting. I will stop sharing the old agenda. I will put back the new agenda, and then I will introduce our twin mastermind. Where is my September agenda? Here we go. So this entire program was envisioned by the twin mastermind of Naresh Duggal and Chris Curry. And they're both here, I think. Yes, I can see them. They're both here, so wave. There we go, good, okay. From the Santa Clara Valley, from the Santa Clara County Office of Sustainability. And in this, they had the critical help from their two interns, Olivia and Sumner, and I know at least one of them is in there, so just wave in the chat, Olivia and Sumner, if you're here. Without Olivia and Sumner, this would not have happened, and I think what you're seeing here is really the culmination of a year's worth of their efforts as well. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce Chris Curry, and I'll let Chris talk a little bit about his work and his thinking for the Alliance, because Chris will be our point person for the Santa Clara Valley Urban Forestry Alliance from now on. So, and then from there, we'll segue right into Miranda Hutton's keynote address. So, Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Igor. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself. Some of you may know me or may have worked with me. Many of you probably worked with or spoken with Olivia. Again, many thanks to her for the hard work she's done on this. I just wanted to let you know that I will be the key point. I'll be the person reaching out to you, letting you know what SCVUFA is doing, when we're meeting, what kind of resources we're offering, you know, what kind of activities we have, and how we're moving urban forestry forward. And I truly am sincerely looking forward to it, looking forward to doing the work and getting an idea of what is possible, what we're seeing from some other areas, Los Angeles, Chicago, and kind of the idea of what's possible that we can do here. I think it's, you know, it's something that's within our reach to work together and actually have this collaborative effort. It makes sense because, you know, we're talking about an ecological resource, not a jurisdictional resource. You know, just really excited to see what it is. I hope that kind of these two webinars get some excitement going, and I hope there's something in here for everyone in this room, whether you help maintain trees in our urban forestry, if you help manage trees, if you help administrate programs that do things with trees. I hope that between this fantastic line of speakers from last webinar, this webinar, like Igor said, that there's something that you can get from it, and there's you see some value in participating in SCVUFA. You know, regardless of what level you're able to do it, we appreciate that, and we will be in touch with you. And I will go ahead and start with sharing. Share sound. Okay, are we we're good?
Hi, good morning. My name is Miranda Hutton. I work for the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm your Acting National Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager. If you're listening to this means that unfortunately I'm not there in person. I wish I could be, but unfortunately I'm on jury duty. But I did want to provide a keynote address for your alliance to set tone and talk a little bit about tools, resources, and policy enhancing urban and community forestry programs from my seat at the Washington office. But first, just a little bit about the U.S. Forest Service, if you haven't heard of us before. We've been around for a little bit, over 100 years. And we have the broad mission to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of our nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of future, present, and future generations. Does not matter if you're part of National Forest System land or a neighborhood park, we have a role to play in maintaining healthy forests and communities, and the people that live in them as well. As I mentioned, I work in the U.S. Forest Service Urban and Community Forestry Program that supports specifically the planning and management of healthy trees and forests in our communities where we live, where we work, and where we play. I see my role in particular is to act as a technical advisor, a convener, a facilitator, connecting a variety of different partners, our states, our tribes, communities, cities, towns, municipalities, our nonprofit organizations, and homeowners, along with a variety of other parts of our federal agency, our research branch, and national forest system to work together and invest in ground up activities, information, tools, public outreach to restore and sustain our community trees and forests. As a program manager, I often get asked this question of what makes a successful urban and community forestry program in urban forests. And my one word answer to that is, of course, partnerships. There's no one group or team that can provide all of the building blocks it takes to maintain and create a resilient urban forest. I think the facilitators for this session, this part 2, have really done a good job of crafting an agenda that highlights some important building blocks, tools, resources, outreach and policy and funding streams that help you all can, hopefully, where you all can branch out as an alliance. So to get the little gray cells moving this morning, I'm going to highlight one tool, one outreach policy, and one funding stream that I've learned about in the last 6 months. So they're new and are helping shape how I do business at a national level in this acting role. First one I'm going to talk about is something close to home though, the LA Tree Viewer. You may be asking me, Miranda, why a city-side tree viewer? And the answer is there are a lot of data viewers out there right now that are providing a new way for us to view the trees, whether they're the forest inventory analysis or a statewide urban tree canopy. But the Los Angeles one, I think, is unique in that it combines a lot of this social, economic, and environmental data together and helps us think about not only
Yes, we have a momentary freeze. Give us just a second. We will unfreeze.
Hi, good morning. My name is Miranda Hutton. I work for the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm your acting national urban and community. I think the facilitators, the little gray cell I've learned about in the last. First one I'm going to talk about is something close to home though, the LA Tree Viewer. You may be asking me, Miranda, why the city view the trees, whether they're the forest inventory analysis or a statewide urban tree canopy. But the Los Angeles one, I think, is unique in that it combines a lot of this social, economic, and environmental data together and helps us think about not only where our canopy is, but where it should be going and where are these areas that we should be investing in. This LA Tree Canopy Viewer is also one of the prime tools that is being used to help develop the LA Urban Forest Management Plan, which is so important to how we do business on the ground in LA. And it was developed in partnership with a lot of different types of groups, research groups like LMU, Loyola Marymount University, nonprofits like Tree People, city partnerships like City Plants in the city of LA, as well as funded by larger groups like myself at the U.S. Forest Service and CalFire. And it gets to the point that these viewers and tools are so useful. And I'm seeing this one in LA be copied on a national level for tree equity viewing and other work. And so it just hones in the fact for me that there are a lot of people out there that value trees for different reasons. And the more ways we can articulate those values and share that information, whether it's information on ecosystem services, like how much stormwater runoff it can do, public health considerations, or social considerations, or economic values, we're going to be better equipped to improve and maintain our urban trees because we're able to build those partnerships with all of those folks in mind. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about an outreach policy tool that's new on a national level. It's called the Justice 40 Initiative. Maybe some of you have heard of it in context of the Climate Conservation Corps, but it's an executive order that affects the whole entire government agencies, or any government agencies that work with states or local communities. And basically, it's a promise to deliver at least 40% of our overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. I bring this up because we're tackling this at the Forest Service, but I think for partnerships like you all and a lot of partnerships in California, you guys have been thinking about this for a long while. And it's something that you all can help lead in and help us think of a larger role in partnerships of federal agencies and how to work in this area. And I'm particularly excited to think about how we can build that next climate conservation corps, that next future generation of advisors and leaders, both on the ground and in Washington, to help us with clean energy and climate resiliency, as well as our urban forest sustainability. The last thing I'll mention is funding. I think there's a lot of topics today about different funding mechanisms. I'm going to talk about the U.S. Forest Service State Urban Forest Resiliency Grant, which one has the unfortunate acronym of SUFFER, but hopefully you won't be suffering through it. It's a pilot program that started last year and is nationally competitive. And it has the broad mission to address management of our urban forests, targeting projects that impact invasive pests, pathogens, and environmental stressors. But I think the unique thing about this is it has to be done through the lens of equity, environmental justice, climate change, or public health initiatives. While this funding is only available to the states, one of the great things about working in the state of California is CalFire has a system set up with tons of with multiple regional urban foresters, where you can work in partnership with them, help work through this, maybe through a sub-grant program. The funding is federal funding, matching 1-to-1, but it can help boost a lot of the existing projects that you perhaps have on the ground with federal match. Last year, we actually were one of the 5 entities across the US that received a state urban forest resilience grant project. And it was in Southern California, working with a local school, the Audubon Center, and Los Angeles Urban Forests to create a biocultural approach to how we plant trees in those parks and manage invasives. So I invite you all to think about if there's room in your portfolio or program to partner and see if that might be a good fit for moving forward one of your projects. So just one final thought. I've mentioned one tool, one funding resource, one policy that's come across my desk recently that is helping shape how I do business, but I know there's more out there. And you're going to be hearing a lot about them today. So I invite you all to put your thinking caps on, your innovation caps on, and think about how we can arrange those building blocks, those different types of activities, tools, resources, and policies to build a sustainable urban forest community, alliance, and forest. Thank you.
Right. Well, as you can see, Miranda's humble as usual, but she didn't quite, I think, give herself enough credit for a lot of the good things that are happening in urban forestry in California. And it's largely thanks to this very collaborative interaction between the U.S. Forest Service, again, for which Miranda gets a lot of credit, and our state's Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, now known as CalFire. That's really what sort of kicked off a lot of the urban forest management initiatives in California some 20 or so years ago. And we'll hear from our state's urban forester and other folks at CalFire later today. But this was, I think, a great keynote, a great introduction to what's possible. And we will eventually put the previous webinar online, the recording online, and you can then go back and watch it, and you'll see when Miranda mentioned Los Angeles, those of us in Northern California tend not to think of Los Angeles as the leader in everything. Of course, they would disagree. But we heard from Rachel Malloridge, and I think it was interesting to hear exactly the same message of you need tools, and we heard about data, you need policies, and we had an example from John Sway, and then you need some kind of outreach, you need some kind of funding. And we'll talk about a lot of that today. So I think it's coming together in this larger picture. And for those of you who are watching, I think it's fully okay for you to ask one basic question, which is what's in it for me? And I think that's totally fine. And you should, in fact, ask that question, you should articulate that, and then think about, okay, here are the things I need. How can I, by joining the Santa Clara Valley Urban Forestry Alliance, advance my own interests? I think that's 100% a legitimate way to go. So as we go through this, please do think about what it is you need and where it is you would like help from a regional alliance. And just to remind you, we want you to join the regional alliance, where you would commit to a grand total of 1 hour per quarter. 1 hour per quarter. So 4 hours per year. And I realize people are busy, and especially these days, everybody's in love with additional Zoom meetings. But again, think about what you need and think about how a regional approach could get you there. That's really, I think, a good way of starting here. So we are about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Chris, we can keep going. I see our wonderful panelists are here. So I'm perfectly fine with us. So let me put up the agenda. Let me put up the agenda back up. Agenda, September agenda. So here we are. Again, last time we talked about policies, we talked about data, right? And remember Miranda's little triangle of elements. Today we're going to talk about that. We also talked about, talked about policy, we talked about data. Today, we're going to talk about education, outreach, and awareness. Then we'll talk about funding, and then we'll talk about operations. And I know this last bit, the operation capacity, was brought up specifically by some agencies that said, well, this is all nice, but we don't have the capacity. Well, there's different ways to get to capacity. So that's what we'll kind of finish with today. But we'll start with education, outreach, and awareness. And here we have a really excellent set of panelists. We'll first hear from Natalie Brubaker from Canopy, a nonprofit organization or community benefit organization in Palo Alto that works on through the Mid-Peninsula. Then we'll hear about the state level approaches from the California Urban Forestry Council, and we'll hear from Nancy and Deb at the California Urban Forestry Council. And then we'll have a few minutes for questions. And again, for those of you who are not working in education, which I think is most of you, think about what education, outreach, and awareness could do for your agency. Very frequently, I hear from arborists, urban tree managers, that people don't know, people meaning local citizens, residents, either don't know or don't care, or that this is just not very high on their priority list when it actually comes to doing something or funding something. So we're going to now hear about some approaches to how you get that education, how you get that outreach a little bit more effectively. So I think without any further yakking from me, I would turn it over to Natalie, unless I've got other suggestions from anybody. I don't see anything because I've minimized the panelists, so I can't see anybody. That's always helpful. So Natalie, please take it away. And Natalie, please go ahead and introduce yourself. I think that's the best way to go. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen first. Okay, hopefully you only see my slides.
Yep, it's good.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Yeah, so hello everybody. My name is Natalie Brubaker and I am the Director of Special Projects at Canopy. We're an urban forestry nonprofit based in Palo Alto. And today I will share about the ways that our work is made possible through both public and private partnerships. So I'll just get into that. So partnering with other organizations and public institutions has been instrumental to our success, to Canopy's success in the Mid-Peninsula, because we're a small organization of, I think we're at 11 staff now, and our partnerships really allow us to amplify not only our opportunities, but they really help to expand our capacity and our reach. And so also partnerships are often a way for us to secure funding for our work so that we can then share that via being a resource to the communities we serve in ways that might not otherwise be possible. So a resource for education, awareness building, outreach for the cities we work in, and things like that. And there are 4 distinct categories of partnerships that we engage in. I mean, there are others, but these are the main ones. And so those are cities, school districts, research entities, and other nonprofits. And I will go through each of these categories, and I'm just going to spotlight an example from one example of each category. So in terms of our city partnerships, Canopy partners with the city of Palo Alto, the city of East Palo Alto, and the city of Mountain View. And we have contracts with each of these cities for the work that we do there. And these contracts largely fund our tree planting and tree care programs, as well as specific education and advocacy programs that are intended to serve the residents of that particular city. And so I'm going to spotlight Palo Alto, our partnership with the city of Palo Alto. So Canopy was founded in Palo Alto in 1996, and we have maintained contracts with the city for about 25 years. And typically we have 3-year contracts for base programs that we occasionally amend within the three-year period to add additional things that might arise, additional projects based on goals of the Urban Forest Master Plan for the city. And we, in our contract, in our partnership with the city, we commit to offering a certain number of education programs, such as arborist-led tree walks, trainings for residents on how to plant and care for trees, lessons at schools. We also provide a slew of educational materials just on our website, via social media, going to events and tabling and sharing, brochures and just being a resource to people. And we also host events in partnership with the city. So every year we have an annual tree planting with the mayor and an Arbor Day festival or event during California's Arbor Week. Related to advocacy, we review and make comments on policies, ordinances, and manuals that affect the urban forest. We offer letters of support or concern for projects that either positively or negatively impact the city's trees. We also attend city council meetings and provide comments on projects that involve practices that may impact the city's urban forest as well. And as I said, based on the urban forest, the goals of the urban forest master plan for the city of Palo Alto, we also coordinate tree planting events, currently in the south part of the city, where there is less tree canopy cover. So we're planting on private property and residential yards. And then Canopy commits to caring for those trees for the first 3 years after they're planted. So that's also part of our contract with the city, is to do that tree care work. And then we have various surveys that we do. One of them is our Young Tree Care Survey, where we teach volunteers to literally walk all of the streets of Palo Alto and inspect the young trees throughout the city. They're not only the trees that Canopy plants, but all of the city's young trees to assess their health. And then we produce a report that we then give to the city at every year, so they kind of get a sense of the scope of work that's needed to be done and where. And then there are all sorts of other special projects that we do. Just some examples of current projects are that we're currently hosting a citizen science survey of the native oaks in the city, so 4 specific native oaks. And we are training volunteers to go out and literally scout out all of the oaks in the city. This survey was done 20 years ago, and I think we found there were 9,000 oaks of 4 different species, and we're doing it again to see how the population has changed. So that data will be really helpful for the city in their re-oaking efforts. We're also working with the city on a tree selection tool for the public to use to learn about species that we either recommend or don't recommend for planting. But ultimately, our role is to be a liaison with the public and to engage the community in planting trees, stewarding them, and really just enjoying them. That's ultimately the goal as well. And so then another area that we have partnerships is school districts and schools. We have a very robust youth education program at Canopy that we've developed over the last 10 years. And in East Palo Alto specifically, we partner with the Ravenswood City School District to offer education programs at all of the schools within the district. And over the last 10 years, we've planted over 1,000 trees on the school campuses at all of the schools. And now those trees are the subject of our hands-on science lessons. And so we engage the students in learning about the trees, enjoying them, and also stewarding them and taking care of them with very light tree care work when possible. And so at the start, around June of every year, we draft a memorandum of understanding, an MOU with the district that details all of the programs that we're going to offer at the schools and the ways we're going to, the ways the district will support us with our programming there. And the MOU is reviewed and approved by the school board every June for the upcoming academic year. And with this partnership, it's very helpful. We have an academic liaison, or sorry, administrative liaison with the district. So that in our case is the STEM coordinator for the district. We meet with her throughout the year to ask questions, to get support on how to connect with the schools and line up our programming, but also just to, decide on any changes we might need to make each year. So it's really helpful to have a one-person point person that we can meet with. We don't receive any funding for these programs from the school district. We apply for outside funding to make these programs free for all of the schools. I just want to make sure that that's clear. But what we do get back is a commitment from the principals and teachers who honor the MOU by welcoming our programs at their schools. So this in turn means that we can actually offer our programs equitably throughout the whole district to all, for example, all of the 5th grades in the whole district, all of the 2nd grades. And it's not just that we're offering programs at schools where one particular teacher expresses interest. And the contract also means that we can reliably serve students every single year, despite any teacher turnover, any principal turnover. So that's really helpful also. Okay, and then move on to the next category, which is research entities. So we make, at Canopy, we make decisions based on science, and our partnerships with local research entities informs our work. So, and we also contribute data gathered from our various citizen science projects to the work of local research organizations. And so one example is the San Francisco Estuary Institute, or SFEI, which uses science and technology to address natural resource challenges, both locally and regionally. And so we work collaboratively with them. For example, you know, they have all sorts of things that they're doing. But for an example is that they have partnered, you know, with Google on the Google Ecology Program, and they brought Canopy in along with other nonprofits as a resource, in our case, for urban forestry knowledge, for their project to sort of restore the Google campus to, you know, ecological functions that have been lost due to development. So that's an example. We also share our data from our oak surveys that I mentioned earlier. The data that we're currently collecting and have collected over the years of the oak population in Palo Alto is really useful for SFEI because it's the only such data that exists in all of the US in terms of the effect of oaks in the urban environment. And we're also currently partnering with them on the creation of an urban forest master plan for the city of East Palo Alto. Then we also love to host researchers from SFEI as speakers for our events and things like that. Okay, last category is our other nonprofits. So we do partner with nonprofits and community groups on various programs. This is probably in a category where we have the most partnerships because our work really is definitely amplified when we can work with other organizations. So on all of our programs. One example is Grassroots Ecology, which is an organization that focuses on habitat restoration. In some ways that we partner with them, examples are that we will host planting events where Canopy focuses on trees that will get planted, and Grassroots Ecology focuses on the native understory plants. And we'll work together on landscape design, and we'll apply for funding for the project and host events together. We also co-lead education programs. There's one in particular for fourth graders in Palo Alto, where they get to go to El Palo Alto, the big redwood tree that the city's named after, and learn about the history and the ecology of the area. And then our capacity to launch, I think that the best thing about partnering with other nonprofits is that we can really design much larger projects than we could if we were working on our own. And we can also apply for funding together, which often we can just propose projects that are just far more robust than we could alone. And another just smaller thing is that we love to just share best practices. So we just happen to be in the same building, which is also really nice. But we can share things about how to run an effective staff meeting, or favorite tools that we like to use, and how to run a robust internship program, or all sorts of things. So that's another benefit as well. So I hope this is helpful. This is just a kind of a quick overview of how we partner. And I look forward to any questions you have. So thank you for your time.
All right. Outstanding, Natalie. As always. So this was fantastic. Just a reminder to everybody listening. So Canopy has had a 27-year partnership with Palo Alto. So if you are just starting out, don't sort of think that you need to have all of this all at once, but think about some of the things Natalie described. Would partnering with a community benefit organization for those specific things, young tree care, public education, some form of census of trees, would that make sense for your municipality? Canopy Plants is able to plant trees on private properties. I know for a lot of cities, smaller cities in the Santa Clara Valley, trees on private property, maybe you've thought about it, maybe you haven't thought about it, maybe that's the major kind of trees you have. But as a city, you're sort of saying, I don't know that I want to get into directly planting trees on private property. Well, maybe there is a community benefit organization that is just waiting for the right kind of partnership with your city. And then that organization could plant trees on private property. So kind of think about which elements here would make sense in your situation. Canopy really is a sort of shining example of an established organization that does a whole number of things. And that's really a result of a 26-year set of development partnerships and hard work on part of folks like Natalie. But again, if you're just starting out, think about the individual elements that would make sense. So, okay, moving on, and we'll have some time for questions. So I think it'll be good if we have questions for both Natalie and Nancy and Deb at the end. But now let's hear from a sort of statewide perspective on outreach, education, and partnerships. And we will hear from Nancy and Deb, and I will let Nancy and Deb introduce themselves. So.
Hi, can I be heard and seen? Am I good?
Yes, you can. You are super. And there's Deb.
Awesome. I'm going to start off, and I just want to underline what Igor was just saying. Look at the good work that's already being done in your community, and try and partner or involve. I hear a dog.
My puppy, yeah.
Those groups in your success, and you're also helping them to succeed, rather than come in and necessarily duplicate or start fresh. There's already lots and lots of good work being done. So hi everyone, I'm honored to be here. Deb's going to get our
Yeah, I'm going to put our presentation up.
Okay. I'm honored to be here amongst our esteemed peers, the people who are getting it done. And it's really impressive what's going on right now with this group. I'm Nancy Hughes. I'm the Executive Director of the California Urban Forest Council. And today, Deb Etheridge, our Communications Director, and I will take you through our methodology behind our education, outreach, and awareness efforts. Next slide, Deb. I thought it would be good to let you know the reasons why we do these things. Here is a definition of who we are. It's pretty straightforward. It is about improved quality of life, addressing public, economic, and environmental health issues using urban and community forestry as a tool. Next slide. So here's our vision. This is what we want California to look like when we have done our job. So pretty straightforward. It's a picture. And then our mission describes the type of investments we want to make and that we want to see being made by elected officials, decision makers, and others. Next slide. So here's a bit of background. California Urban Forest Council began in 1968. It's over 50 years old. We were the first urban forest council in the country. Now each state has one. We, along with these other councils, are supported by the U.S. Forest Service in their to help them meet their urban and community forestry goals across the country. And we are also fortunate enough to have funding and support from CalFire. So you can see here we have 7 regional councils. All are exceedingly independent of the mothership in their community-based focus. But what they have in common is addressing local issues and opportunities for urban and community forestry. And they bring together every strata of the industry, from interested citizens to local nonprofits, to commercial arborists, all the way to utilities and government agencies. Truly a regional approach and a cast of thousands. They offer their own, almost, They offer their own educational workshops and gatherings. And the Bay Area has the Bay Area Urban Forest Ecosystem Council, if you'd like to get involved. And I know they're involved to a certain extent in what's happening today. So next slide, please. So we have programs, and these are some, yeah, I think we're covering all of them. We have a new one coming on, but in the past 5 years, these are some of the programs that we have created in coordination with multiple partners. Approach to this, the partnership, Natalie emphasized it, it couldn't be more important towards success, but towards regional scale tree planting projects. And these are funded by CalFire, Urban Community Forestry, and through the California Climate Initiative. But with these amazing partners and contractors, we work directly with cities and then support local tree groups or other community-based groups toward their success in helping the tree planting programs be successful in engendering ownership and the long lives of these trees. So campaigns are created for each of these, and outreach materials are as well. And each community-based group goes through what we call the California Tree, see if I can say this, the California Tree Team training, where volunteers end up becoming leaders. And over 80% of the trees are planted in disadvantaged neighborhoods with follow-up care. Next slide, please. So on our website, and Deb is going to go over so many things in detail for you, but these are 3 tools that you'll find there. The first what we did was help conceptualize the amazing work of Dr. Greg McPherson, and then partner with Davey Institute on the iTree planting calculator. And we had some leftover funding from a CalFire grant, and CalFire was gracious enough to allow us to use it to help make this tool. So I have a feeling that most of you use this tool, and we were really, really happy to make the easy to use tool that helped deliver on the information that you need for your grants. And then we also have the Urban Forest Management Plan Toolkit, which is a free comprehensive planning tool where you can create a management plan for your city, your HOA, your park system, anyone who manages large tracts of trees. It is comprehensive. It will take time. You can add your materials. You can bring in partners, different city departments. It's been used by many, many people, even planners use it for their clients. So that's another great tool that's on our website. And then one other thing, the California Investment Climate Tree Map. It has, Kalaine Vargas Rabden has mapped all of the trees that CalFire has funded through their recent CCI grant opportunities. And Deb will show these in more depth, but this map shows where all your trees are, right on the street where they're planted, and what those trees are doing, what they are and what they're doing over the 40-year life of the tree. So you can see all across California the great work that you are all contributing to. Okay, next slide, please. So another one of the efforts that ties in greatly, but differently, but it supports our mission, is the advocacy work that we do in Sacramento. So one of the amazing outcomes this year was this SB 347. And we were in a support capacity with Senator Ana Caballero, and we created the California Community and Neighborhood Tree Fund, which went through all the hoops in the legislature, and the governor signed it about 6 weeks ago. And there's no new tax. It's a voluntary fund that when you file your California state taxes, you can check a box and you can contribute to funding CalFire's urban and community forestry program. And so, if you know foundations, big funders who are looking for a way to fund statewide efforts in urban forestry, please steer them to this site. It's not ready yet, but it's coming. And a portion of those funds are going to go to communities in, say, the Salinas area or the Central Valley who don't have arborists, who don't have grant writers, who don't have the staff infrastructure that they need, but need urban forestry. So we're really proud of this. We're going to look for all kinds of support from our industry as a whole to make this a success. And we also do, we have a lobbying firm. We hire a lobbying firm and we advocate via the legislature for many other bills and policies that support all the work that you do locally, such as getting funding annually to CalFire for their urban and community forestry programs. So I think there's one more. Yep, one more slide. Here we go. So having these education materials is fundamental to who we are as an organization and something we will always do. If we never put another tree in the ground, we are going to be working to design materials that are helpful to the broader California community. And you know, different campaigns that we've created. So if you have any important ideas, if you think that there's something we can be helpful with, that's where a lot of these things start, please reach out to us. We are ready to hear them. We have the talent in our staffing that makes all this happen that we understand many organizations and cities do not have. And Deb will go into this in detail. Deb is the talent I'm talking about. And she does all of this amazing work for us, from designing our website to creating our infographics and our different campaigns that we dream up. So on that note, I think I will hand it over to Deb. Deb, did I miss anything?
No, I can take it from there.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Deb Etheridge. I'm the Communications Director here at CUF. And a little about my background. I come from a graphic design, branding background, where I then went off and worked in advertising for many years. So I have an art direction, but ended up being a creative director and also doing copywriting. So I have a rounded advertising and branding background. I got tired of trying to flog stuff to people. So I decided to put my talents to better use and work for some nonprofits that are doing community work. So that's where I am today. And I've been here 7 years. So here we go. Here's some of our work. So just to divide it up, here's a way of thinking of our education, outreach, and awareness, because often these do overlap. But if we look at education more in a traditional education sense, so a lot of our education work comes in the form of doing things like webinars like we're all on now, conducting workshops when we could meet in person, to training our tree team from one of our previous programs, excuse me, our annual conference. So that is quite an important event, and the topics for that change often. We also develop tools like Nancy described, the tree planting tool and the urban forestry management plan, things like that you can actually use and deliver benefits and actually can help you in your work. Outreach, I have thrown everything about outreach. So anything we produce, like our newsletter, flyers, infographics, down social media posts, anything that goes out is part of our outreach. If we look at awareness, I think awareness is more of a two-way street. So we gain awareness about issues or topics that are important to people within our area. And that often comes through too when we're looking at what content and what speakers to include in a conference, what topics everyone wants to know more about. As we know, urban woods become more and more prominent over the last few years. So we have an urban wood focus this year with the conference. We're also noticing people are more concerned over the years about issues on climate change and sustainability. So we look at trying to find more speakers to sometimes, try and bring in new perspectives. We try and find people that we haven't always heard from before. But part of the awareness is having those conversations with people like yourselves to find out what topics you're interested in, what you need to know more about. Also to find out what tools and materials that you need to help you in your work. We have done some campaigns that have been survey-based, and I'll talk about one of those a little later, the Trees Are Essential campaign, where we wanted to find out overall attitudes towards the urban forest and towards people's perception of their small parks, their street trees when we were all going into the first lockdown last year. So surveys help us too with gaining information about what material to produce. And then there's also the awareness push of material, like at the moment with the drought, and we've been through a drought before and a drought campaign before. So this time we want to do a flip. We flipped our headline. Instead of save water, we started with save our trees and save water. So we want to keep our trees. So that's the way I'm looking at the topics for today. So under education, as I mentioned, we do a number of training sessions. So this is our HighSpeed Rail Circle 3 grant. So we had a grant to plant trees with community partners along the HighSpeed Rail corridor. And although that corridor has now changed, at the beginning, this group's in South San Francisco, and that was to be included along the HighSpeed Rail. It's a much shorter HighSpeed Rail project now, but we had a very good session, a workshop out in South San Francisco, and a number of other cities that participated. So for our California tree team, with these programs, several months or weeks before the actual tree planting event, we engage the community and try and find people within the community who would like to learn more and be able to volunteer as a team leader on the day of the tree planting event. So we conducted some workshops. They come out, we have an arborist talk to them. We also have talk about the benefits of trees within their community. They then go out into the field, they do a tree tour with an arborist, and then actually plant a tree and learn how to plant a tree properly so that when the tree planting day arrives in a few weeks' time, they can actually go out and help other members of the community by leading teams and helping them in the field. With the Circle 3 grant as well, we produced a number of videos. And this time around on Circle 3, as mentioned earlier, was how Canopy can actually plant on residential properties. So most of our planting is parks, streets, those sort of things. But in Circle 3, we teamed up through the Arbor Day Foundation and had a community canopy aspect. So I think Nancy, they were 1 gallon trees, little tiny trees, but we had trained people to go out do canvassing in those neighborhoods to get people to sign up to receive a tree. And they could actually receive 2 trees, and they would come out. These trees would be planted for them often. They'd pick them up at the tree planting event for some others, but that was an important aspect of having not only people come out to the tree planting event at the park, but also to have them plant trees back at home. So the video helped for the people that we had as volunteers that were with the community groups that were going to be doing the canvassing. Then more related to actual tree planting, we produced the videos. So right tree in the right place, talking about where you want to actually plant your tree, how to plant your tree, and then we also had a post-planting tree care video. And all of these videos were done in English and Spanish. So our team was able to do both versions of those. So that was helpful. So for webinars, I know everyone's been doing so many webinars, but we've had a few topics in the last 2 years. Everything from Colleen taking you through how to use the iTree planting calculator, so you can do your greenhouse gas quantifications for your grant proposals. That one's actually quite popular. And Colleen tends to do that one every other year or so for us, and we record those. So it's always, excuse me, always a good one to catch if you're writing grants. We, as part of our programs, and also with the Trees Are Essential campaign, we did an overall kind of beginners, what we called an intro to urban forestry webinar. And that was actually interesting to see the attendance for that, because we had a lot of people coming through from places like South America and a few spots in Europe. So that one did have a lot of international appeal. We have been working with our regional councils and looking at a series in the Bay Area and Sacramento Valley. This one's coming up next week on managing risk to promote a safe and healthy urban forest. So this one's being in conjunction with our City Forest Renewal program. City Forest Renewal, we looked at, we were responding to actually a lot of the issues around short hole borer and drought and the number of tree deaths, particularly in Southern California. So for certain cities that partnered with us, they were able to get financial assistance through the grant to remove those dead, dying, dangerous trees, but they would have to plant 2 trees for every tree that was removed. So we also added this workshop element to that program so people could learn more about managing the risk locally within their urban forests. A popular one, we look beyond the state often, particularly if you're looking at California's changing climate, now responses to drought and heat. So we looked at cutting edge urban forestry efforts outside of California. We had some speakers, I believe, from Arizona and Nevada for that one. So that's quite good. I'm looking at, even things like species selection. And as an aside to that, we have Matt Riga looking at underutilized species for us at the moment, which will be part of some of our grants going forward. So looking at trees that respond to certain different geographic areas across the state and their different growing conditions. One of the popular ones from last year, particularly while we're all sitting at home in the COVID shutdowns, was Dr. Ming Kuo presented her findings on human health and how being within an environment with a lot of tree canopy and a lot of greenery actually reduced your healthcare costs. So that was a good one. And if you missed that, it is on our website and you can have a look at that webinar. So that's webinars and workshops are an important part of our overall education strategy. And within that, there's the tools, as Nancy talked about before. So the iTree planting calculator. And even if you're not writing a grant, I've actually jumped on the planting calculator before just to look at the benefits from the trees just around my home as an example of playing with it. Excuse me, particularly before we took one out to put in solar. So iTree planting, you can get a number of the co-benefits. We use this on all of our grant proposals and our grant reports. So that's quite handy because then when we do our grant reports, we can look at how our species selection and then look at what we put in initially and look at our carbon numbers and see how well our programs actually went there. And it helps when we can actually give that information to the communities, particularly to the municipalities and elected officials within those communities or decision makers, to show the benefits of signing up for the program when we're looking for partners. So that one's important for us. The tree map It's great if you've been planting trees with any of the CalFire, California Climate Investment Grant money, then your trees are on the map. So we can also find out, and Colleen has worked to put this together for us, and she's recently updated it. So if your information has gone through, it should be in the map. You can see that the most common species, so we've got the Chinese pistache up there, very popular. And you can actually zoom in on the map side and really zoom into an area. You can also use this as a tool to work out where you might want to do a planting where there's not as many trees, in conjunction with like a virus screening scan or something like that. But you can get all your benefits. You can look at overall, there's been 83,000 trees planted there, and we can get the co-benefits for the environment. The urban forestry management plan. So this is a great little tool if a community is unable to hire someone like a Davey, sorry Dorothy, or they just have a small amount of trees to manage, not a huge municipality, but someone like a homeowners association or a small town. So this is actually a good tool in that it takes you through step by step. So you plug in your information, you plug it in what you want to achieve, and the toolkit actually walks you through the whole process. So it could be a useful thing to use too if you've never done a plan within your community, or it could even be a smaller neighborhood plan. So that one's a useful tool as well. And finally, our next conference is coming up. So next month, October 14 and 15. We are looking at this one as looking at the carbon cycle. So we're looking at how we go from trees in the ground and keeping that capturing that carbon, and then how we go into uses within urban wood. And urban wood has really grown in the last few years. We've had it, really take off, and now we're getting standards for the actual wood that's being produced. There's a lot more people moving into that area that realize there's some great species and product opportunities for them down the road, and that we're not looking at a dead tree as a piece of waste to go into landfill. So that's great. If you're interested in any of those topics, this schedule's coming together. We're still finalizing it, but we have Matt Withers going to be talking about some underutilized species and the work he's doing on one of our programs. We'll have some panel discussions around policy issues around urban woods. There'll be, I believe we've got some virtual tours of some milling areas and some lightning rounds. So that should be fun on an online platform next month. For our outreach, as I said earlier, I bundled everything in here that is stuff that we produce. So we find our mostly monthly newsletter. I'd love it to be monthly, but as there's only Nancy, myself, and Lita, our bookkeeper, it gets a bit tough for us to always have a monthly newsletter, but we do have it. So our newsletter is used to promote things, especially with upcoming events. We include any career or funding opportunities that come up. So, and then we do promotions as well as updates on our program. So we've been doing a haiku promotion for the last, I think, 4 years, which has become very popular. One of the first pieces that I worked on when I started actually volunteering was looking at creating some infographics, some flyers directed at homeowners to let them know the benefits of having trees around their home, and also for businesses. So these ones are back from I think 2014. and were quite popular. And then we would co-brand these as well. So this is just delivering little bite-sized pieces of information. We've also sliced them up for social media sharing. And I think Stephen from Alcerito is on the call. We did a survey in Alcerito, I believe, Stephen, about business owners' attitudes towards their street trees along the front of their properties, and then produced a brochure with benefits and answering some of those frequently asked questions and concerns that were raised about their trees, about the street trees in regards to their business. Further outreach materials. So these are just general outreach materials around taking a lot of the research papers. So, you know, like Greg's work, Kathy's work, Minquo's work, and taking those little nuggets from within those papers and putting them into a flyer that we can get out there and show the benefits. So we have 2 others in this series. We have a urban wood version, and then we also did a flyer on the shot hole borer in response to that. For different audiences, so we have 2 very different audiences. We have people that are familiar with urban forestry and work within the area or municipalities or parks and development. But then we also have our stuff that goes out to the wider audience. And we want to make our materials accessible. So we look at the vocabulary we're using, what points we're trying to get across, and to have messaging that, you know, is kind of is an introduction to this topic up to more advanced topics as we go. So this is one of our simpler brochures talking about the benefits of trees, and we have these available at all of our planning events for the Circle 3 program. We then did, because on the Circle program, and we were doing community trees, so people had residential trees. So one of the things that was important with that program was we gave out tree watering reminder magnets, because a lot of the events will be around Arbor Day in spring. And as we know, in most of California, that's when the rain has stopped for the year, and you don't get rain again till winter. So we would have tree watering reminders. We were also using a text app so that we could send out SMS alerts of, hey, it's really hot and you've got a baby tree, so don't forget to, you know, water it. So that, I think that is, those sort of things were quite helpful. It's probably not something that most organizations consider, but that little kind of, I think, text reminder app was quite helpful for us. We then sent out a postcard for people that had had trees for about, you know, a year or 2, when the tree's just starting to come on, and you need to look at, well, you know, don't chop and prune your tree incorrectly. Here's some tips to make it have a nice structure for the future. And I should get a move on because our time's almost up. For awareness now, as I said before, we were looking at this as a 2-way street. We get feedback from everyone as to what topics they're interested in, what materials we need to be creating, but then we also do awareness campaigns like things around drought. So one of the things that we need to be aware of, and we try and do this, is we try and make the language within our materials accessible, and that can also mean translating things into other languages, but we also try and we want the imagery as well. And this is something that I've had coming from an advertising background, is if people can see people in the images that look like them, then it makes it easier to sell to them. So it's so that's something we try to keep in mind, is to have a diverse range for working with diverse communities. At the moment, this is our real big push. So Save Our Trees and Save Water, our drought awareness campaign. So this is mostly, we have a number of materials. We did a tips infographic type flyer during the previous drought. There's this one, which was very popular. 30 communities almost took this up, including one in Canada. So it gave some tips on mostly how you can save water within your landscape so that you can continue to water your trees. Because a thing that we were finding too is people would turn off the water for their lawn, but that was the only way the tree got water. So we wanted to make sure that people would keep their trees alive. With working with our regional councils, and at the time, Lee Ayres was at Tree Fresno, and we worked with Lee to develop these series of flyers for different building types, because they were trying to promote, and they were doing some workshops to show that even if you have, say, an industrial site, you can still have trees and healthy trees and save water. So we had everything from single family home, multi-family home, office or retail environment through to industrial site. One of the things with the industrial site too was that it would be good for, air pollution from trucks coming along and things like that. So there's some good tips and benefits on those ones. For the current drought campaign, just to try and turn it around from just saving water, but also we need to save trees. So we're looking at things around take 5-gallon bucket challenge, because often we talk about how to water your tree in reference to your 5-gallon bucket. And there's gave people a number of tips around the home in which they could easily save a few gallons here or there. And that way you can actually keep your tree alive through the drought. Remember to water in the right place, fix leaks, all those usual sort of things. And don't worry, a number of arborists will always jump in and tell me if I've got something slightly wrong. So we do get a lot of feedback that way. Last year for the awareness campaign, so some cities and counties we heard were really chopping their urban forestry budgets, some to zero. So with people going into lockdown and spending more time at home, and we all know and appreciate the benefits of an urban forestry for our health, but we wanted to find out if the wider public we wanted to find out people's attitudes. We also wanted to find out more kind of industry information. So we created a survey, and we did find, we got a lot of feedback that said, yes, people are spending more time outside. They've never seen so many people taking walks. They've never seen, so many people in their neighborhood before, and we're kind of a little worried, it seems sometimes. But people were getting out more, and just simple things like having street trees along your neighborhood walk. If that's your only opportunity to exercise that day, what people were saying were important to them. So when we all started doing Zoom last year, we produced a number of Zoom backgrounds that people could share as part of the Trees Are Essential Awareness program. We had done a number of advocacy tools before. So there were some community groups. So occasionally we'll get contacted by people that are like a homeowners association or a group that are concerned about a certain large number of trees being taken out in a large community. So we have advocacy tools, and basically we have a couple of presentations that are step-by-step that they can work through, and we give them the information so that they can go and advocate for themselves and their own community on local issues. We have a lot of resources that we co-brand. So if you go to the website and go to the resources tab, you can find pretty much all the stuff we have. We make it all freely available. We will even put a logo on it for you. So if you want anything, let us know. And here's my details and Nancy's contact details. And then, of course, we have all these fantastic sponsors and partners, and without them, we couldn't do what we do. So thank you to all of those. And that's mine. So I guess we're over to questions.
All right, Deb. So just for everybody who I don't think you could have not noticed that the materials that Deb presented were quite professionally made. This was not, someone's kind of put in 5 minutes of work aside, after their day as an arborist. These are professionally made materials that Deb made that are now available for everyone to use. And I'm just kind of pointing that out. That's a benefit of having belonging to a larger network, that you all of a sudden have access to professionals like Deb who are completely outside of our tree world, but are able to move the message forward. And please, for those of you who are not familiar with the California Urban Forest Council materials, please go on the website and have a look. And I bet you will find something there that you can use in your outreach right now. Because again, there's a whole set of materials that really are way beyond what, say, a small municipality could produce. And it really allows you to have ready-made, serious, professional materials to use in your outreach programs. So again, think about what it is you need, and then say, okay, well, looky here, it's already available on the CAUFC website. And the Urban Forest Management Toolkit is just one example of that. And I think Nancy and Deb mentioned, well, maybe this is for smaller municipalities, but it's also for anybody who's even thinking of doing a urban forest management plan. Even if you have all the money in the world and you can pay to have, Thurston Howell, the consultant, make your urban forest management plan, look at the toolkit, because it'll help you evaluate Thurston Howell's plan that their McKinsey produces for you. You'll be able to say, well, does this really make sense? Is it really what we want? Right? You'll just spend 10 minutes with that toolkit, and it'll help you think through, okay, how do I engage the community members, the angry civilians? How do I talk to them about what the appropriate goals are for an urban forest management plan? Right? What is it we want? And there was a question in the question box about native trees. And that's a perfect example for, here is a question you could ask your citizens, your residents. What do you think our priorities should be for our urban forest management plan? Do we prioritize native trees, or do we prioritize, for example, shade? Shading our streets because we really want people to be able to walk down the street. So again, fantastic resources. And I think both Natalie and Nancy mentioned campaigns. And I just want to stress that it's something that, again, your municipality, your agency, you're starting out, maybe a campaign is something you're at. Doesn't have to be giant, doesn't have to be years upon years, small, short campaign that gets a specific issue moving forward. And I think, again, both Natalie and Nancy gave examples of this. And I don't know, were there any questions that we can very quickly address? Yeah, so there is this question of native trees. Again, the Native Plant Society does a lot of that advocacy. And I think the broader question of urban forestry is, what are your goals, given that we have goals other than biodiversity, for example, shading the streets or providing an equitable distribution of canopy. If you say that the only trees that count are native trees, then that kind of discourages planting in those places where you can't fit native trees. So there's a bunch of things to consider here. But again, that's an excellent starting point for a community discussion within some kind of framework. And I think both Natalie and Deb gave you an idea of how you could make a framework. So it's not just people kind of talking about everything and anything. There's like a framework within which we're going to move forward. Okay. I don't.
Can I mention one thing?
Go.
We actually, you can go on the resources pages, and on some of them, it's actually like a shopping cart. So you can decide you want this infographic, and you can give us your logo and your URL, and Deb will customize that for you. And then and then you get put in the Invest from the Ground Up family of organizations that are doing this work. And so you can then use that in your monthly water bills or on your websites, at events, whatever. Yeah. We send you the PDF ready to go, and you can print it out, and there you have it.
And we've also sliced them up before, so people can use on social media as long as they tag us.
Fantastic. I mean, this is the kind of resources that, again, I know for a lot of smaller municipalities, agencies, where do I start? Well, start with one of these materials, stick your logo next to it, and Deb will do that for you. And start a campaign and start a dialogue with your residents, with your community benefit organizations. Where do we start? How do we then pick one issue and maybe run a small campaign about it? Okay, I will shut up now. Thank you very, very, very much, Natalie and Nancy and Deb. This was fantastic. It was really inspirational. I think it's really inspirational to see an established, serious community benefit organization and to see how many moving parts there are. And also to just be reminded that that didn't happen overnight. That's a long-term partnership that benefits the city, benefits the organization, and really has a whole universe of associated collaborators. And then Nancy and Deb, thank you very much for presenting all of these resources that are available at no charge. I don't want to say they're free because they're not free. Somebody has to pay for this expertise. I would not be able to produce these graphics. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who would be able to produce serious promotional materials the way Deb produces them. But they're available. They're available at no cost to all of you who are attending. Please use them as a starting point. If you need something further, talk to Nancy, talk to Deb. There's always potential for further adjustment. But use these materials to get started. Use the tools like the Urban Forest Management Plan to get started. So thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Deb. Thank you.
Happy to be here. Thanks for including us.
All right, we're going to move right on ahead, and I will put up the agenda. So we have covered the education, outreach, and awareness section, and we're now going to move into everyone's favorite section, money. I don't know, it's anyone's favorite section, but it's one of the more important sections. And I know for a lot of people, they hear about these great things and they just kind of say, oh, we don't have the funding. Well, let's talk about the funding. We heard from Joan Sway last time about how to reconfigure the thinking around funding. Now we're going to talk very specifically about Proposition E, and we'll hear from Carla Short, the City of San Francisco Bureau of Urban Forestry, and I think still maybe the acting head of San Francisco Public Works, and Dan Flanagan, the retired director of the Friends of the Urban Forest in San Francisco. And for all those of you who are saying, we don't have the funding, we don't have the interest, we have a hostile, city or hostile residents, or people are just not interested, listen to this presentation, because I think it really shows you what can be done. So without further ado, Carla, Dan, take it away.
Thanks, Igor. I'm gonna try to get this right. Can you let me share my screen?
Who will let Carla share? Chris?
I think you need to take down your.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
No problem.
Here we go. Bam. Okay.
All right, let's try that now. And can everyone see my screen?
We can see your screen. Yeah. Do you want to do just a slide or?
Great.
There we go. Yay. There we go. Excellent.
Okay, so thank you all for having us. And I know that some of you heard John's presentation. I'm going to do a super quick review for those who didn't. So apologies if this is repetition for some of you. I'll try to be brief about this part. So our street tree program in San Francisco, called Street Tree SF, cares for approximately 125,000 trees, which includes pruning, occasional removal, but also repairing sidewalks damaged by tree roots. In a nutshell, we used to have a crazy bifurcated maintenance system where the city maintained about a third of all the street trees and property owners maintained the rest. And while this says 5 years ago, we were only funded to maintain 28,000 trees, I would argue we were underfunded to maintain even that small fraction of trees we were responsible. And our budget was repeatedly cut, our tree maintenance budget. So we tried to create a solution to this. And involved a number of steps, including transferring maintenance of trees to property owners. So we were reducing the overall number that we were responsible for maintaining. We also felt like we needed to prepare a credible solution. So we developed the Urban Forest Master Plan Phase 1 street trees, which included a financing study component, which was really important for the credibility, because for some crazy reason, people don't tend to believe city departments when they tell you what they need. And so having an external resource really dive into that was very important. And then it resulted in this ballot initiative that we're going to talk more about. So our financing study recommended a number of things, which we had also been recommending, which was a stable long-term funding program for tree maintenance. And it identified the overall costs for the program, which included about $9 million for planting and establishment, $11.5 million for maintenance, almost $6 million for sidewalk repair, and almost $2 million for non-sewer related claims. And then our financing study recommended actually a parcel tax based on street frontage for ongoing operations and maintenance and not for planting, which was strategic, but in the end, it turned into a set aside, and we would have loved to have put that $9 million for planting and establishment back in, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So once we got our measure passed, we had to implement it. And Dan is going to talk more about the process to getting this measure passed. But I did want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we faced in terms of implementation, because I think, you know, we have some lessons to share on that front. So we passed this in November of 2016, but it took effect in July of 2017. And what that meant was we didn't actually have any money until July of 2017. So we spent time planning, but we could not even begin the hiring process. We could not even begin the procurement process. We could not even begin the contracting process until the money actually flowed in July of 2017. And so we were trying to figure out, well, what's the most strategic way to approach maintaining all of these trees now that we have not 28,000, but 125,000 trees we're responsible for, basically overnight on July 1. And what we did was, as part of our planning process, we completed a census so that we knew what we were actually maintaining. And we also had a point in time assessment of the condition of those trees. And what we did in order to try to figure out the best way to tackle the whole city and really maintaining all of the trees in the most strategic way possible, we created what we called the worst first approach. And we took the information that we had from the census and we mapped it with weighted priorities. So we had from our census, a very, again, quick level 1 assessment that recommended, priority 1, 2, and 3, pruning and removal, and then routine maintenance. And so we weighted those priorities. So obviously priority 1 was the highest for removals and pruning, priority 2 next, and then priority 3, and then everything else didn't get an additional weight. And we mapped out the trees in the city and we created what we call our heat map. So you can see here, it's, I think, intuitive, the darkest red were the highest priority trees. And, I just show the elm on the right to just, show you what deferred maintenance looks like. I think many of you are practitioners, you're well aware, but we inherited a lot of this. People who had not maintained trees for ever or decades or very infrequently, including our own trees, which we were maintaining very infrequently on about a 10 to 12 year cycle. So we had a lot to catch up on. And we also had to manage expectations. So initially when the program started, we got crazy calls from people. They had just voted to give us a lot of money. And they wanted us to prune their tree July 1st, the day that it all started. And you can see, like, July of 2017, we got, 1,100 calls for tree pruning. And as a result, we were like, this is crazy. We can't possibly prune all these trees so quickly. So we published our heat map on our website, and we worked with our colleagues at 311 to actually put up a notice that said, we're trying to be efficient and strategic, and we're going to work our way through the city. And then we also developed some materials that we would put out before our contractors or our crews went into any neighborhood to let people know when to expect. So the big green box there gets a sticker that tells you, tells the resident when they can expect to see us come and prune. And what we see was that really helped try to manage these expectations, with, of course, a few spikes whenever there's a dramatic failure or a storm that happens. So one of the kind of what we call unintended consequences of success was we were systematically approaching the worst first. We were addressing the priority 1 and 2 removals of trees, and that meant we were removing far more trees than we had in the past in a given year. And that got a lot of attention, and we got a lot of pressure from folks to plant replacement trees immediately. And as I mentioned, we didn't have funding included in this initiative for planting replacement trees. So we have received a lot of negative attention, even though we're doing, I think, really responsible, good tree care. We're getting a lot of negative attention for the fact that we can't replace trees as quickly as we are removing them. But unfortunately, we can't leave safety hazards existing in the right of way, even if we have a delay in replacing. So I did want to take just a little bit of time to go over what kind of a case study that I think we really learned a lot from on 24th Street in the Mission in San Francisco. So if you're familiar with San Francisco, it's 24th Street between Potrero Avenue and Mission Street. And this is a neighborhood commercial district that was lined with ficus trees and gets a lot of pedestrian activity. And we have had some terrifying, spectacular failures on 24th Street. We also have a lot of challenges from the existing trees. Those of you who know ficus well know that structurally they can be a real challenge because the decurrent form means we end up with a lot of limb failures, and those limbs can be very, very large. But we're also seeing a lot of canopy dieback in many of these ficus. They're really, they've been in constrained conditions for a long time, and we're really seeing that they are becoming problematic. And they also are fairly notorious for disrupting the sidewalk. So you can see some pretty heavy sidewalk lift in the bottom right photo there. On 24th Street, which is, as I mentioned, a neighborhood commercial district, we also have a lot of damage from vehicles that, ends up with weakening some of this very large limbs on these ficus. And then just on the left, you can see a classic sort of ficus structure where we've got codominance and included bark. And, this is where we see these failures routinely in the species, as I'm sure many of you are aware. So this is what we were dealing with. And we basically knew that we had to address this corridor in particular. Some of the other challenges, we have streetlights that are completely surrounded by ficus canopy. On the upper left, you can see that they grow very, very close. The sidewalk is only about 9 feet wide on this corridor. And so ficus are just going to overwhelm that space very quickly. So many, many issues around these trees. And then just showing a little bit of the sidewalk damage. And then after we undertook this effort, the repaired sidewalk at the bottom. So we knew that this was going to be a really contentious proposal to remove most of the ficus trees along 24th Street. And one of the things that this program we're seeking to do that I think is really important is try to rebuild trust. We lost a lot of trust when the city was transferring maintenance of trees to people. I think there was trust lost when we were removing trees without having funding available to replant. And so with 24th Street, we wanted to try to start to rebuild that trust. And so even though we knew it would be unpopular to remove the trees, we reached out to the community before we even started our public notification process. We held several community meetings working with the Cultural Association and working with the district supervisor's office to let people know what the plan was. And then we had, we started our formal process to remove the trees, which includes placing a public notice on the trees. And we had many more informal meetings than we typically do before we held our hearing. And then we held our public hearing for these trees, and we had over 100 people show up. Our original assessment was we were proposing to remove 76 of the trees. And then, as you can see on the right, after we discussed with the community, and basically they proposed to us that we should prune the trees more heavily than we normally would ever do, which we had explained why we couldn't mitigate these risks through pruning. The community said, you know, we want to keep these trees basically almost at any cost, and we want you to consider pruning them heavily, retrenchment pruning, much more than, you know, our general guidelines of 25 or 30% of the canopy, because we'd rather have trees that are established and are mature, even if they're pruned extremely. So we actually reduced the number of trees to be removed based on that feedback with the community and based on that understanding. And then the other big thing that came out of it, and I know I'm already over my 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to go quickly, is, you know, we explained that we had a limited amount of trees. We were planning to replant all of the trees that we were removing, plus an additional 15 trees along the 24th Street corridor. But the funding that we had set aside for that includes 3 years of watering, because we never plant a tree unless we're sure we have the watering funds in place. And certainly, as with many of your municipalities, I'm sure, you know, we no longer count on winter rains. We used to budget for about 9 months of water every year, and now we budget for 12 months because of the recurring droughts. And so that is the largest cost of our planting, is those watering costs. And we explained that to the community, and they came back and said, well, we want more trees. What if we agreed to do the watering? And I will admit that I was very fearful of this. We've been burned in the past where people say they want to water, and they don't really know what kind of a commitment they are signing up for, you know, that it really has to happen every week. And the Mission District is one of the warmest districts in San Francisco. And so you can't go, you know, a few weeks without watering a young tree. It really will not survive that. And so we said, you know, we're not sure we can agree to that because we don't know if you guys really know what you're getting into. And they said, we're going to give you a plan that you feel comfortable with. And if we take on the watering, will you use all that funding you had set aside for watering to plant more trees along the corridor? And so we agreed to do that. And they created a group called Mission Verde. And they came up with a very robust program of teams of volunteers. We provided the watering carts that you see in the photo on the right. And they have redundancies built in so that if people are out of town or unavailable, that they have backup waterers who will water for them. They check in when they do it, and they share that information with us. And so this was kind of a unique partnership that, again, I was very, very afraid. I was afraid and skeptical, but I have to say, I have been very impressed with their results. And I think these are some of the new trees that have been planted along the corridor. by our public works crews. And you're about to hear from Dan Flanagan, our partner at Friends of the Urban Forest, who they are planting actually the bulk of the additional trees. So the city, my team, is planting the trees along the 24th Street corridor after we repaired all the sidewalks, which you can see in that middle photo on the top. And then Friends of the Urban Forest is planting all those extra trees that we agreed to with the community, and then the community is watering. And this is kind of a snapshot of the future. These were trees that were planted about 6 years ago, prior to our beginning this process. And this was kind of what we shared with the community, what to expect when the project is over. You know, you will have some different canopy. You know, these are maples. They are not going to be the dense, super broad canopy that we had with the ficus, but the community felt strongly they wanted deciduous trees. They wanted the winter sun, and they actually selected the species. But you know, we were able to point to these trees as kind of what the future will look like. And I think that we're really optimistic given the success we've had with working with these community partners. Of course, Friends of the Urban Forest, who you'll hear from Dan next, but also our new partner in Mission Verde and their commitment to watering in their community. And these watering carts that work really, really well. So I think this is a new model, and it's a really good way to try to build that trust. And that's what our focus is right now. And so, you know, we had challenges with the implementation of the program, but also opportunities. And as I just mentioned, the partners were kind of, the partners are really key to the success of this program and also to building that trust. And we just, you know, we just heard from Deb and Nancy about the importance of partnerships as well. So model. And on that note, I will turn it over to Dan Flanagan. Maybe on mute. Are you there, Dan?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank God. Hi there. Clara's going to help me with the video, the moving the video along, and also with the slides. And also, I just want to make sure in my presentation, I'll use the word BUF, which is Bureau of Urban Forestry, and FUF, which is Friends of the Urban Forest. And BUF is part of the Department of the Environment. So Carla just told you the impact of the success of Prop E, which has been really quite profound in the urban forest of San Francisco. But my job today is to quickly tell you a story about how it came about. And that story involves three major characters. The first character is Carla Short, is a dedicated employee of the city who had a vision for what the urban forest could be. The second key character in this story is essentially Scott Wiener, who was a supervisor from the Castro district, who is now state senator, Scott Wiener, and he was just dedicated to trying to change an archaic tree maintenance policy that we had, probably one of the most crazy tree maintenance policies in the United States. And lastly, we had a very dedicated and also well-respected nonprofit. So please remember, the story I'm telling you takes place over 8 years. This was not done overnight. It took a long time. There are a lot of ups and downs, but I'm not going to tell you about the ups and downs. So next slide. Working out the kinks.
For some reason, it's not letting me advance. I don't know if that's because you're presenting.
They did it before.
Yeah.
Igor, help us.
Why won't it let me advance?
Oh, maybe Chris can give us a hand here.
So we are viewing your screen, Carla.
Oh, there it now went.
Okay,
Yay.
thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
So why don't we, next slide. So just a little bit of background. Friends of Urban Forest was founded in 1981 by concerned citizens and actually some employees of the city when, ironically, this is a tendency in San Francisco, they cut the funding for all street tree planting and care. And so a bunch of folks got together and thought, okay, fine, trees were really important. And so they started Friends of the Urban Forest. I was hired as an ED in 2008. My predecessor really felt that the best way to get things accomplished with City Hall was to do it in an adversarial way. And my background was completely different. I had been dealing more, I worked in a partnership in my previous time in Wall Street. And also when I worked at a nonprofit, we were a national park partner. We taught environmental science in national parks. So my background was more akin to working as a partner. But when I came in 2008, I realized that we really needed to build trust between the city, the mayor, the Department of Environment, not the Department of Public Works, and also Friends of the Urban Forest. And that trust had been broken for many years. And so that was something that was really integral to our success going forward. Next slide, please. Hopefully.
I don't know why it's not liking this. So strange.
Hey, folks, it's a brilliant presentation. Just wait.
Maybe, should I stop sharing and then start again? I'm going to try that. Sorry, everybody. I don't know why it's.
In the meantime, if you can send that to either to me or Chris also.
Okay.
Just in case.
It's a big presentation, so I will try to send it, but I'm not sure if I can.
Okay.
I wonder if we unspotlight Carla and Dan, maybe that would help. I know we spotlighted our speakers in Zoom, but I wonder if that takes control away from.
Oh.
I don't know. This is a webinar, not a meeting, so the settings are a little different.
It is just not letting me do this.
Is it it's changing on your computer, but just not showing into Zoom, or is it
No,
not changing on your computer
It's
either?
not changing on my computer either. Here, let's try this. I'm gonna get out of the full screen mode. Let's try it this way. I did not
Igor?
set this up. I know it worked for me. Okay, so what if we do this?
There we go.
Yeah, let's stay in this mode now.
Let's stay small.
Yeah.
So as we're saying, I started in 2008, 2009. We, Friends of Urban Forest, conducted a strategic planning process. In that process, we came up with a couple of things. At that point, we thought we only had 105,000 street trees. Shows you how much we really knew about our street tree population. And we also found out that it's pretty standard that in most urban forests, you lose about 4% of your urban forest every year. And then the reality at that point, Friends of Urban Forest was only planting about 800 trees. We reduced it. It had gone down dramatically over the years. And the city had continually cut the budget for not only the care of trees, for planting trees. So they weren't planting many trees. So it was very clear that we were losing trees in our urban forests. Next slide, please. Cross your fingers. Uh-oh. Oh, here we go. Great. So in our, we've got success going here now. So, so in our strategic plan, we came up with three major goals. One was to invest in our tree planting. That was really key. We wanted to move that 800 number way up higher. The other thing that was really important is when I came on board to Friends of the Forest, we had 2 old trucks. I think both were 25 years old. We had no depreciation. There was no investment in the infrastructure of Friends of the Forest. So we decided that we had to have as a high priority to build a robust financial and operational infrastructure. And lastly, and this is probably the most key to this conversation today, is that we decided that the only way that Friends of the Forest could truly impact what was going on in the city was to start using advocacy. And we wanted to change public policy through advocacy. Next slide. In doing this, we came up with key messages, but at the same time, we were building this infrastructure, and the infrastructure was essentially trying to build our membership. And our membership went from, and we had people giving us money, but we never called them members. So we actually created an email list. And over the years, that email list went from 1,000 folks to 20,000 folks. And so we were in constant contact with those 20,000 folks via email, and we were honing our message at that point. And the message was, of the top 20 cities in the United States, San Francisco was the 17th in terms of tree canopy. Second was, the tree loss is outpacing the tree planting. And lastly, neglect of tree maintenance is dangerous for the public. And we decided that in the end, what I liked about this is not only was we also at the same time, we created a cohort of volunteers that were exclusively focused on advocacy, who could talk to supervisors at City Hall. And they were using these 3 messages. And one of the great moments in life, a couple of years later, I'm hearing various folks in City Hall quote our messaging and as their own ideas. And that's when I knew that something was beginning to change in San Francisco. Next slide, please. So in 2000, Friends of the Forest and BUF worked really closely on re-energizing our San Francisco Urban Council. That was a really important component of us trying to change what was going on in the San Francisco Urban Forest. And what happened was, in the next year, 2010, John Sway started his urban forest plan. The first phase that Carla talked about was focused on trees. And FUF, BUF, and the Urban Forest Council played a key role in actually creating that plan. And luckily, our FUF goals were really closely aligned to the Urban Forest Plan. Next slide. So the background of this is also that, as Carla mentioned, the city had been continually cutting the budget for not only the care of trees, but also the planting of trees. So I'm over 10 minutes, but we're stopping. What happened was, I actually got taken out for a cup of tea with the director of the Public Works, and he said he is being forced to now start relinquishing trees back to adjacent property owners, because he felt it was just too dangerous. As Carla mentioned, the best thing to do is to prune a tree between 3 and 5 years, and they were on a 10 to 12-year maintenance schedule, and that essentially was creating a dangerous situation for tree care. So he started relinquishing trees back to adjacent property owners, which was incredibly unpopular. And it was a real true betrayal for the public, and actually for us thinking about running a campaign, it was fantastic because people were talking about trees. Next slide, please. So we hired a campaign consultant in 2013. We needed to find out a couple things. One is, how much was this thing going to cost? And I have to tell you, the first time in 2013, it cost X, and 14, it cost Y, and only grew over time. So be prepared as you start talking about campaigns, it actually only grows, it doesn't get less. We wanted to ascertain what was the best year we wanted to run our campaign, and we started focusing on 2016 because it would be a presidential campaign. And then the most important things, we needed to start understanding what messages would resonate with the public. And so we did that through phone surveys and focus groups. Next slide, please. The big debate in terms of messaging was twofold. One is, fortuitously, we were having a lot of major storms back in that period of time, those several years. And those storms were wreaking havoc with certain trees, blackwood acacia, and ficus trees, just 2 examples. And this is what was happening and being printed on the newspapers on a kind of pretty often basis for a couple of months there during the winters. So we call this Treemageddon. So when we had our focus groups we would actually be talking about Treemageddon and the danger of not taking care of trees. Then we also try to talk about the benefit of trees. We realized that Treemageddon got a lot more attention than the benefits, which kind of broke my heart. So we wanted to make sure we had a balanced message, that we not only talked about the danger of urban forest that's not being taken care of, but the possibility of what could happen if we had an urban forest that was thriving and important and helping the environment. Next slide, please. So our polling by 2016 actually got better, and for some very convoluted reasons, we went from a partial tax to a set aside, and thank God we went for a set aside, because that meant the 66% that we needed for a partial tax was now only 50%. Our polling was way over 50%. So we launched, our messaging was refined. We had very high public awareness, and we decided, let's go. And it was time to get something done. And so we moved ahead. Next slide, please. So we ran the campaign, and you go to the next slide too. So I'm going to speed through this. In November, we were successful. We got, I always say 76.8% of the vote, not 78% of the vote. And you know that essentially the city became responsible for all the street tree maintenance, tree-related sidewalk damage, and liability for tree-related injuries. It created a $19 million funding source in perpetuity. And what's important is that that also grows according to the same size that the budget grows. And in addition to this, and this is a little debate between Carla and myself, we have money in that fund to plant an additional 30, and I think even more than 30,000 trees. So it's the kind of thing that if we continue to plant trees, we will not run out of money. That money is in that fund going forward. We've gotten a lot of awards for this. This is really great. But one of the things that Igor is saying is, I hope that you can take some information from this. And the information that I want to leave you with, next slide. Well, the main message is that we needed a political leader, and that was Scott Wiener. We desperately needed a city agency with vision. And I feel that one of the key players in this was the nonprofit, where we could take action where other people couldn't take action. And the way I look at it, we always call it a special sauce. And we were the precipitant in that special sauce. We could go out there to our 20,000 folks and actually motivate folks to go down, show up at City Hall, and really talk to their supervisors and make change possible. For those who want to know how much it cost, we were really lucky to have our fiscal year was between June and July. So the campaign went over 2 years. We were allowed as a nonprofit to donate $200,000 to the campaign in 1 year, $200,000 in next year, and then we went off and raised the extra $400,000. Next slide. So my hope is for Silicon Valley folks is that you all can take some pieces of this story and make it your own story. And again, the main issue is trust between city and nonprofits, and basically just a lot of hard work over time in educating the public. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan, and I'm so sorry that we had technical difficulties. I did want to just clarify one point that Dan made. I think it's a very important point, but I wanted to just clarify. When we established the cost, the $19 million annual cost, we planned for the growth of the urban forest. So as Dan said, we planned for the maintenance of an additional roughly 30,000 street trees. But we didn't actually have funding to plant those trees. So the model that we developed with that AECOM developed, we didn't develop it with them, they developed it, but it basically anticipated there are a lot of early costs that will then we'll start to gain efficiencies, and we'll start to gain some, as certain really high cost trees are removed and replaced with lower maintenance cost trees, we build this fund capacity over time. And so it's designed for our future state urban forest, not for today's urban forest. And I think that's one of the things we really got right.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Dan. We'll hold the questions to the end, but this was super informative. And again, I'm hoping people are taking notes. San Francisco went from a city, and I said this last time, that I really didn't want to mention as an example of urban forestry, simply because of that relinquishment thing, which was at the end of the day not that unusual. There are plenty of other cities, we're not going to name any, where the adjacent property owner is responsible for. There's a largish city in South Bay, for example. We're not going to name any, but how do you convert from that model to a sustainable model? That was not at all obvious. And Dan, Carla, and John explained that, I think, really, really well. But in the interest of time, I will stop yakking and I will turn it over to Mark McPherson. And welcome, Mark, who will talk to us about a new opportunity or a new option for funding in urban forestry. Mark, I will let you introduce yourself, because the way I would introduce you would involve mentioning another McPherson, and I think that's unfair. So I will let Mark introduce himself.
Well,
Mark, take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Mark McPherson. I'm the founder and the director of City Forest Credits. And it's wonderful to see all you great California urban forest people. I was surprised to see Walter Passmore on the list, because he's now a celebrity after his New York Times appearance. They probably had to go through his agent to book him for the webinar here. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that? Great.
Yep,
So the work that Dan and Carla just laid out on Prop E is honestly inspiration. And we can wish that that's a possibility for cities all across the country. And maybe it will be at some point, but there are not a lot of places that have Carla Shorts and Dan Flanagan's and Scott Wiener's who have the patience and the perseverance to do that. So our work is very much designed to say, okay, public funding is great. All you wonderful urban forest people never have enough money to do what you do. Can we connect to private sector funding sources? So we have a nonprofit organization, and we have developed two pathways to that private sector funding. One is through carbon credits. As you know, they've been around for a long time, but there's not really been a way for urban forest projects to earn those credits. The second pathway is what we call an impact certification. It's not a carbon credit. It's really designed for high equity, high health value projects. So I'm going to kind of sprint through this just because we're a little short on time. So bear with me. I'll be on for Q&A after, and of course, happy to communicate via email. So any carbon system is based on the protocols. Protocols are the foundational elements. They set forth all the requirements that projects have to follow to earn carbon credits. So we've developed two protocols, one for planting and another for preservation. Now, many urban forest people don't automatically think about preserving trees. Often that's done more through land trusts and conservancy groups, but preserving mature stands of trees is really important in urban areas, particularly given the growth and the urbanization of the population, because we are projected to convert almost 100 million acres of land into urban land by 2060. So it's important that that not all be roads and rooftops. So we launched 4.5 years ago. We now have carbon projects in a number of different cities. As you probably know, we haven't tried to just roll this out massively. We really wanted to take this project by project, work with people who are motivated to do this, and who understand the challenges and the opportunities. This is not for everybody. But the projects range from projects here. King County is the county that comprises Metro Seattle. They have a whole preservation program. So they are using our preservation protocol to earn credits on parcels preserved. There's another parcel here that's a 3-acre public space, was choked with invasives. It's adjacent to a subsidized public housing facility. So a nonprofit is going in conjunction with the city and essentially restoring that and planting 2,000 trees. Then street trees in Des Moines, natural areas, riparian plantings in Austin, Texas, preservation projects in Chattanooga and Pittsburgh. So really a mix of projects, unified, I think, by a desire to show how this can work and learn how to make it better. So carbon credits. The urban forest is unique among all carbon credits in that the trees do so much more than carbon. And you all know, because you've got iTree, that we can quantify ecosystem values. But what's really unusual is there aren't carbon credits out there that add those quantified ecosystem values into the metric ton of carbon. So our goal early on was to create, in effect, a product, an urban forest credit, that is really different than all the other carbon credits. Just FYI, we are working now on a social impact statement for each project, because you can't quantify equity and health quite in the same way that you can the ecosystem values, but we can describe those impacts. So we're creating a social impact statement that will be added to carbon projects that deliver those impacts as well. So again, I'm going to go through this fast. Here's a quick infographic on how it works. Let's say you're a local operator, and by that I mean, let's say you are a urban forest organization in a city, and you want to do a carbon project. If you follow the line to the left below local operator, you'll see it says plants or protects trees, follows protocols. So the projects have to follow our protocols, city forest credits. We then, and you circle up to the top, the green arrow goes to the right, back to the project operator. We make sure that you comply with the protocols. We issue credits to the local operator. The local operator sells those credits to the buyer. The money goes back from the buyer to the operator. The money doesn't come through us. We charge a small fee for the projects for our work. Ultimate goal flows to the bottom. The buyer gets to offset their emissions. They get these wonderful urban forest credits like no other credits, because they are where people are, and people always have stories. So the urban projects, they all have a story. And what we've heard talking to carbon buyers over and over is when they're buying other carbon credits, it's just like an accounting transaction. They're just buying a credit from a forest in the Congo or Suriname or someplace. So these are credits right in the backyard for companies. And of course, that money allows you to invest more money in trees and communities. So quick, very quick cap of some of the main requirements on a planting project. First one that's scary to many people, you have to make a 25-year commitment. You can plan it, you can aggregate multiple sites into one project. You can even aggregate multiple years into one project. So you can take a 3-year planting program on multiple sites and put that into one project. So far, we really only work with projects on public property. Private property interjects a whole set of complexities that we're not eager to deal with right now. Maybe in version 2 or 3.0, that could be possible. And then essentially the planting methods fall into 2 main categories. There are the linear plantings, the street trees, right-of-way plantings. And then there are the more natural area plantings. And we've just learned, talking to people all over the country, there are actually a lot of natural areas in metropolitan areas in the US, and a lot of planting going on in those natural areas. Those natural areas are planted very differently than street trees. They are not planning for 100% survival of those trees. They expect high mortality. They're planting essentially to create a forest ecosystem. Very different than street trees, where the goal, it's never achieved, but the goal is to have as high a survival as possible. So currently we don't work with projects that are planting fewer than 1,000 trees. And if it's a riparian or a natural areas planting, it's got to be at least 8 to 10 acres. And the reason for that primarily is the carbon volumes don't justify all the expense of going to the trouble of doing a carbon project for smaller scale than this. Preservation, again, very quickly, that's a 40 or 100-year commitment. That's not as scary as it looks, because in a preservation project, the trees have to be protected with an easement, a covenant, or a deed restriction. Most conservancies and land trusts that are doing this, they put perpetual easements on properties they're preserving. So a 40-year commitment is not frightening to them. The preservation, again, the trees can't currently be protected. Has to be in a zoning designation that allows at least one non-forest use. So the property can be developable. Then there has to be that recorded encumbrance that protects the trees. And then it has to meet certain tests for the trees being at risk. And those tests comprise things like, what is the value of the land? And is there development encroaching on the property? We work with properties that are 15 acres or larger. So this right now doesn't really work for projects less than that, unless you're aggregating some small ones, small parcels together. The carbon quantification is not based on the methods developed by my brother, Greg. They're developed essentially on forest carbon science. So we have a separate scientist who leads that group that essentially has a quantification method based on forest carbon. So very quick example, this is Richmond, Virginia. This is probably the poster child for what urban forest carbon can do. They preserved 65 acres of oak hickory forest on an old African-American cemetery. The owners couldn't make the cemetery work economically. They had offers to log the trees. And a community foundation came in, preserved the site. It's now a UNESCO site, the first UNESCO site on the slave route in the US. Credits have been bought on that site by PayPal, Dominion Energy, Jonathan Rose Companies, which is a big affordable housing developer. So now let's switch gears completely. And again, I know I'm going through fast, but just to give you maximum info in a short time here. This is the impact certification. This is not a carbon credit. This came about because we talked to a lot of projects who are too small for carbon crediting, but they may have very high equity, very high health values. We also talked to companies who have sustainability CSR budgets, but they don't really want carbon credits. So we developed this certification. And here's how this works. The project designs a high equity, high health project. And they do that using a scorecard we've developed, which is essentially a guide to the equity and the health impacts of projects. And I'll cover that quickly in just a minute. Then there's funding from a company that comes to implement that project. The project is planted, we certify the project, we give templates for reporting the equity, health, and environmental impacts of the project. Projects do not have to make a long-term commitment to the trees. They do have to build in a maintenance budget in the project. But this is not a carbon project, so doesn't have the same rigors that a carbon project requires in that regard. So the key innovation here is we worked with scientists. Kathy Wolf was one of the main contributors on the health and the equity side. And she was clear, you can't quantify health and equity the way you can ecosystem values, but we can start to describe those. So we developed this scorecard, you could call it a guide. And for human health, social equity, and environment, we created 5 themes. And under each of these 3 categories, there are 30 different impacts and indicators. So under human health, there are 5 themes, but 30 different impacts and indicators. And they're all grouped under these themes. So human health is, again, we hear a lot about urban heat, critical, really important. That's only one of the 5 themes. Same with air quality. Wellness and mental health, connections, cohesion for social health, really important aspects of the contribution of the urban forest. Social equity, again, 30 different impacts and indicators here. because equity is not just planting trees in an under-resourced neighborhood. It is understanding the context, all the inequities that have occurred historically in that area. It's being sensitive to that. It's connecting with the community partly through the informal social networks. It's being aware of informal social gathering places in the community. Seattle, for example, we have a lot of piers, and that's P-I-E-R-S, piers that extend onto the water, that are very vibrant social gathering places. But they're not planned for. They're not really on the radar of the urban planners. So those are the kind of equity things that are really important. So after the project is implemented, that is planted out, we issue an impact summary and a report. And the goal here is to give urban forest people tools to design a high equity, high health project, and then demonstrate those values and give them a consistent reporting framework so that they can give this to all the companies that they do projects for. So I'm going to end now. I will say a couple things about California and carbon in particular. I've talked to a lot of people in California. I think that with a few exceptions, and San Francisco may be one of the exceptions, a one-off carbon project's probably not going to work. It may work in San Francisco, but I don't think it's going to work in a lot of other parts of the state. And it may work in San Francisco, and I don't mean to put words in the mouth of Carla or John Sway, but they already have some funding. They already inventory and track all their trees. So those kind of costs that would go into carbon projects, again, are not such an impediment for them. They can also aggregate over many different parcels. They can do it over multiple years so they get a larger carbon volume that may make this feasible. I see a thumbs up from Carl again. We're still in discussion on this. What could work in California is something we're working on in Chicago, which is to aggregate a whole region so that there is one very informed entity who knows carbon crediting, who can go work with all the local implementers. So all the local implementers don't have to learn carbon crediting. That expertise is brought by the Santa Clara Valley Urban Forest Alliance. I'm just taking that as an example. Again, don't mean to put words in the mouth of Naresh and Chris, but if you had an umbrella organization who brought that kind of expertise so that each of the individual local organizations, cities, towns, they don't have to learn it all. They have to be told what to do and what their obligations are. And then the umbrella organization will handle the crediting. That's a model that could work. So we're working on that in Chicago. We are working with South Pole Group, which is a big international carbon developer. They're very interested in the Chicago area. The Chicago Region Trees Initiative is the umbrella organization. So they know all the urban forest people. They can recruit and connect with those people. South Pole can handle the crediting and then can also sell the credits because they have that in place. That's what they do. So that's something that I'm happy to explore with you. I think if there's a future for carbon in California, it would probably be through that kind of aggregated regional program. The only other thing I might mention is on the sales side, we are trying something now, which is we have issued in 2021 nationwide about 40,000 tons, 40,000 credits. So we have now essentially bundled all of those into one bundle. And we are working with American Forests and a couple other national organizations to sell the national bundle in one big bundle. That comprises 16 projects. So they would all get an immediate sale without a lot of work on their part. So it's very interesting. We'll let you know how that goes. As with much of the work on the carbon side, we're really pioneering something. So we're learning as we go. Okay, sorry for going a little over, but thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. I think we're going to move right on. So this is really exciting because you get these different potential pathways, and I think again, I hope people are taking notes. It's still the early days for some of these ideas, but our next presenter will talk about the California specific things. So Jimmy will introduce himself, although I think Jimmy needs no introduction. Jimmy, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, let's see here. Make sure. Okay. All right, well, definitely break in, Igor, if something's looking amiss from your end.
Looking good.
So yeah, thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Jimmy Scheid. I am still holding the role as the regional urban forester for the Bay Area North Coast, part of CalFire's Urban and Community Forestry program, as well as serving as an area supervisor for the Southern California portion of our program as well. And I've held this role, that is the regional forester for the Bay, since I came onto the program since 2008. So I've had a pretty good understanding of where things have moved in the counties therein. And I'm seeing a lot of familiar names here in the panelist list. And if we were doing this in person, I would love to see a showing of hands to see kind of what backgrounds people represent. But I'm seeing a lot of folks that I know we've worked with over the past with our grant programs. But I'm hopefully reaching out to some folks that maybe are not as familiar. And I will apologize if you see me moving around a little bit. It's to distract the automated lights in the office I'm in to keep the power on. So please bear with me, and we'll move ahead here. So just kind of a quick background, because when you see us and you see us in uniform, people, you know, they give us the kind of odd look and wonder, you know, if we're actually foresters. And yes, CalFire is a very large organization that employs nearly 8,000 permanent and seasonal employees, most of which work on the fire side, but we are a very diverse organization, and we do employ a lot of staff and resource management programs, of which our urban and community forestry program is one of those. And it's very much a department that's morphed a lot since 1885 when it was became. So yeah, in general, though, it's good to know that we do have a very heavy role on the emergency services side of things throughout the state in 36 counties, and we take care of 31 million plus acres of wildfire response area, our state responsibility area, which equates to over 350,000 emergencies per year that we find ourselves involved with. So kind of boiling that down more on the resource management side, and specifically my program, Urban and Community Forestry. I won't try to get too much into the details here, as my counterparts, especially John, could probably talk a little bit more statewide, but our program is very much guided by enabling legislation through the Urban Forestry Act of 1978, which has undergone an update and can be found in California Public Resource Code. And we are guided by an advisory committee made up of a diverse group of constituents and a strategic plan that has recently undergone updating. So a lot of the information I'm going to share with you today can be found on our website, which I'll kind of throw up near the end there too. Our staff has grown quite a bit here in the last year or so. We have 6 regional territories that we have an urban forester supporting, as you can see in the diagram here on the slide, with that number 2 being the kind of Bay Area North Coast where I've served and where we're looking to kind of fill behind me. And we also have a program analyst who's recently come aboard, Colin Highlands, an education specialist, and Eileen Hollett, and our state urban forester program manager, Walter Passmore, who you'll hear from a little bit more later on. But besides the technical assistance and advice that we've come to grow into our own areas in, we provide a lot in the way of public and professional education, and we can do this in a variety of ways, whether it's in person, speaking at events or council meetings, public fairs, Tree City USA and Arbor Day events, for which in California we oversee that Tree City USA program. working with a wide array of partners and constituents to transfer technology and technical information to help people at local and regional levels, being advocates for best practice. And a lot of times our work boils down to connecting people, to ensuring that this urban forestry network continues to grow, and that we put people in the right positions to have important conversations to move the industry ahead. And for the majority of the reason I'm here today, we also administer grants, and I think that may interest some of you. Our grant program currently for 2021-22 has us administering potentially $10 million from early action fund monies in that neighborhood. And we're also looking at hopefully receiving more through the governor's budget and potentially other sources, which John may get into later. But as useful as this information is, I wish I had the opportunity to discuss this with you a few months back when we received the proposals for this year for this initial 10 million. So that said, we usually offer grants on a annual basis. So take this information to heart, regardless of where you stand or what your thoughts may be towards applying. And just, you know, I think I don't want to preach to the choir here. Hopefully you all know the benefits of what urban forests do, but in terms of how our program helps enact these, I kind of have, you know, consolidated some information on this one slide here in terms of what the impact is to California in terms of the number of jobs, you know, the economic impact, and then more so with our program, nearly 700 grants that we've awarded over the years, with funds approaching $150 million, and how that translates, at least in a tangible way, to the number of trees that are planted and will continue to be with projects that are ongoing currently. And yeah, what that relates to in terms of carbon sequestration and other values that are more and more being quantified here as time goes on. I don't want to read this to you, but a lot of information there. So just a little as a way of background, we have had a grant program of one form of another as part of our work since the turn of the century. And while this started off with smaller dollar awards, primarily for tree planting, it was funded through Propositions 12, 40, and 84. Those initial projects have seen a lot of growth here in the last 7 years with the inception of Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or more recently, California Climate Investments money that has allowed us to not only provide higher dollar individual grant awards, but a larger pot of money to work out of typically, you know, moving from what was $1 to $2 million per year to now 10 to 15 on average, I'll say. And this has come with a little bit more in the way of what reporting we are required to submit to their resources board, and to focus more on disadvantaged communities and so forth as well, but has proved to be quite worthwhile. So that translates to 20 years of really, you know, an actual investment on the ground in communities across the state. And more locally, for those of you residing in Santa Clara County, what that's looked like is, you know, a total of 24 projects that I'm familiar with. A lot of these I've had a hand in overseeing during that time. And as you can see, that involves a lot of city governments, nonprofit groups, and even the Forest Service with an innovative grant, those being the types behind each entity there that they received, in which they did forest inventory and assessment within the city of San Jose. So yeah, we've certainly had an investment in Santa Clara County communities throughout the years, equating to nearly $4 million in funding. So with our current grants, you know, and a lot of this stuff holds true from one year to the next. We do, of course, work in urban areas. Some people look at us as CalFire and think they want to do a fuels reduction project in the hills, or something more along the lines of forest improvement of native timberlands. Those kinds of activities are typically covered by other programs within our department. So aside from that, though, we have worked routinely with cities, counties, other local governments, and nonprofit groups, as I mentioned in the previous slide, but also resource conservation in school districts, water districts, things of that nature. So there are a lot of ways to involve eligible entities, and if not, if you don't represent one of those and you're interested, you can certainly partner with one. It's typically a two-stage process in terms of the grants that we offer. You know, a more you know, general concept proposal that then, if selected, is allowed to have that entity apply for a more robust project application. And it is highly competitive. On average, we see, you know, quite a bit more in terms of requested funds and what we can actually award. This year alone, we have something in the neighborhood of 6 times as much as we're going to be able to award so far this year. And that still is being sorted out. We don't have anybody that's received an award this year, just for the record. And those current grant awards fall between 150K and 1.5 million. A lot of this is just due to the amount of staffing we have and the amount of projects we can administer. So smaller dollar projects typically find their way in through other sources, such as maybe a sub-grant through California Relief and so forth. So something to keep in mind of there, as well as the cost share, which is usually a 75-25 split. And that can be done oftentimes in kind and with other donations and staff time and things of that sort, and can be waived for various hardships. And the projects usually have about a 3-year window to be completed. So those are just some overarching things to keep in mind that typically hold from one year to the next. Our current grant categories include urban forest expansion and improvement, which is kind of the bread and butter for a lot of people. It's the tree planting, site prep, care, both during and now after, with post-grant monies and related establishment and infrastructure costs, as well as orchards and community gardens. And I know I'm running through this quickly, so feel free to reach out to me at another time if you want more info. Urban forest management activities, which can include anything from you know, a citywide tree inventory and canopy assessment to management plans, updating policies or creating ordinances, things of that nature that relate to better management there, and other education and related outreach to engage the community. And this project type, of course, goes to local government agencies. And then the new one for this year was urban forestry education and workforce development, which, yeah, we'll see what we get out of that. We haven't, again, funded anything as of yet, but it's kind of open-ended for a purpose to see, you know, what kind of ideas we'd get in terms of creating more of a green job workforce, using industry best practices, developing urban forestry skills and education at all levels. And so, yeah, that should be pretty interesting, and look forward to seeing what we get there. General competitive considerations, regardless, I would say, of what year we're funding or what source or pot of money that we're utilizing. Of course, we want to meet the intent of the California Urban Forestry Act, which I mentioned. Following instructions and grant guidelines, I can't say enough about how concise and how communicative your ideas are, how well you can put thoughts on paper, I'll say. How cost effectiveness and how reasonable your budget is, and what the value then is compared to others in that same category, of course, is something we need to be understanding of as stewards of public funds. Typically, you know, what value that has to disadvantaged or low income communities is something we take into account, as well as the benefits, of which there are many, and how those are quantified, your use of best practice and how sound your ideas are technically, and of course partnerships, and how you've involved community stewards and what kind of local support you have from landowners and things of that nature, and ultimately how replicable a project is. Does it exist in a vacuum, or can it be done elsewhere, and can it be scaled if necessary? So, you know, a lot of this, again, is on our website. Read our grant guidelines. While they are unique, of course, to this year's awards that will be determined later on, a lot of the language does stay consistent from year to year. So be familiar with that, and our process generally can assist you with this effort. Consult with people that have expertise outside of just foresters and arborists and people that do a lot of the groundwork or operations. You know, and realize there's a heavy amount of administrative effort that goes into these, the community organizing, the permitting, a lot of the things that may exceed any one of our individual abilities. Look at the grant awards that were funded in the past that you can find there, and maybe talk to those folks and talk to each other. It can't be stressed enough how important it is to, you know, look outside of your box, look outside of the department you work for or the organization you represent, and think collaboratively. And feel free to reach out to your regional urban forester. So again, our website has an unwieldy name, but you can Google the CalFire UCF program and probably find it easier. But there you'll find information on our current guidelines and past awards, as well as you can sign up for our listserv and get announcements as they come out. And really you can find a lot about other organizations that help support our cause and other guiding materials for our program. So yeah, definitely take a look at that. Reach out to me if you can't, or if you have any other questions. I'm happy to help. So hopefully this alliance here in Santa Clara County is thinking as a county or as a region, and that, you know, they ask themselves, any one of you, you know, how you can collaborate to be more competitive, let's say, in an environment in which there are grant funds. And that doesn't necessarily just have to apply to us, but I'm sure that's useful in any consideration, state or county. So, you know, talk to your neighbors and figure out how, you know, you can enlist and assist those efforts of individual communities and organizations to achieve a bigger cause. And if you have goals at the local or regional level, feel free to always rely on us for assistance. So with that, I will field any questions, or at least turn it over to the panel. Thanks, Igor.
All right, Jimmy, excellent. I have nothing to add, which is amazing, except to just remind everybody of Jimmy's little note that if you are looking at a very small project, so you need a small grant, there is a pass-through mechanism, which is handled by the California Relief. And so, you know, if you're looking to start maybe a small campaign, have a look at the California Relief's website, and there's a set of instructions there on how to apply for those pass-through small grants. Anyway, so that's all I've got. I see the questions are being answered in the chat, or in the question, both in the chat and the question and answer. So I think with that, unless we have any other burning questions that are coming in, and I want to just make sure there's a bunch of stuff answered. Excellent, excellent. Chat, there's a bunch of stuff answered. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, excellent. I think we are good. So I think this was fantastic. The story from San Francisco that, again, entails 8 years worth of effort, and a combination or a partnership between a nonprofit and a municipality, a story or the description from Mark about totally new funding mechanisms. And I think, remember that impact statement? So even if you're not interested in carbon, that may be something that in the future will really allow us to really get the value that people say they place on trees, get that to enable us to manage trees. And then from Jimmy, a summary of what the state is doing. And really, realistically, the state involvement today is huge, enormous. And Jimmy and the other regional urban foresters really are an irreplaceable resource. So please have a look at the websites. I will say right now that some of the websites are not, how can I put this? They're not the most dynamic, zazzy kinds of things, and that's okay. all the information is there. And so have a look, see if what is being proposed is something you can work with. And if you're not sure, give Jimmy an email, send Jimmy an email and say, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? Don't give up like preemptively. And that's one of the big things. Like, don't like, oh, well, that's not something I can work with. No. Contact Jimmy, contact CalFire, and see how you could partner with somebody, how you could adjust your project goals to make them competitive for the funding. Okay, enough for me. And we are just going to move on to the entire next section, and I will put up my agenda just to remind you. So we're in the final stretch here. We talked about education outreach. We talked about funding, which I thought was phenomenal, frankly. Thank you, Carla, Dan, Mark, and Jimmy. And now we're going to talk about operations. And again, this is something that I'm very interested in. And so without much further ado from me, I will introduce John Melvin. And John, again, if you've been in the California urban forestry world, needs no introduction, but John is the person who, well, I have to be careful how I phrase it, but who was the moving force behind making the CalFire urban forestry program what it is today. Maybe he can't say that, but I can. So John has the perspective that few people have. I would argue nobody in California, with maybe the exception of Miranda, our keynote speaker. And so I will just turn it over to John. John will introduce himself in his new position, and John, take it away.
Thank you, Igor. Hopefully you can hear me well.
Yes.
I will probably share my screen a little bit once we get going, but I am the staff chief for resource protection and improvement at CalFire. I oversee 4 programs currently. Igor likes to refer to it as my new position, but I've actually been in the position for about 5 years at this point. I think he refers to it that way because I have done double duty a number of times as covering the urban forestry program manager job. And so I do oversee, amongst other programs, the urban and community forestry program. My other programs include our demonstration state forests program, our forest biometrics program, and our forest entomology and pathology program, which they also interact quite a bit in urban areas with invasive pests and diseases. So you may be familiar with those folks. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about CalFire's more or less statewide perspective as far as policy and budget. Jimmy covered our program structure pretty well for you. We're hopefully going to see some additional expansion of that in the near future, but that all remains to be seen. And I'll talk just a little bit about the philosophy that kind of goes behind it. And I think for you to understand that philosophy, you have to understand our enabling legislation, the California Urban Forestry Act of 1978, which Jimmy referred to. And I'm going to actually share my screen here. So a little bit of patience as I bring up the Urban Forestry Act. And, you know, this is a lot of words and I'm not going to bore you with it, but I think as you develop local policy or you advocate for local policies and or ordinances, there's a lot you can pull from something like the Urban Forestry Act. We don't have to debate whether urban forests are important in California. That's already been done and the legislature has made their findings and declarations. They've told us here in 479908 what our purpose is. There's a lot of them, so that's why we're busy, and it gives us pretty broad authorities to do things to advance urban forestry in the state. It does not mean that we're in any way regulatory. So we do not regulate, but we do use our grant program as one mechanism, technical assistance and advice as another mechanism, and kind of networking and connecting people as one of the ways that we do things. And there's some definitions in here as to what urban forestry is. That's a really important thing to understand, especially as you're advocating for better local policies and to advance urban forestry efforts at the local level.
We're not seeing your slides.
You're not seeing the website at all. Oh, I see why.
Hey, all right.
Better?
Well, something, yes, there we go. Yep, showing up
Okay,
now.
so as I was saying, we have the California Urban Forestry Act. We have the findings and declarations from the legislature signed by the governor. We have the purpose, which is what gives CalFire its marching orders. We have definitions for disadvantaged community, urban area, urban forest maintenance, urban forestry. All those definitions are really important as we move forward in trying to achieve the goals set for us in this act. And it tells us what we shall do. One of the changes that occurred in 2018 with the revamping of the Urban Forestry Act is that this program, what used to be a program that CalFire was allowed to have, now it's a program that CalFire has to have. And that's a big distinction because that gives it another level of importance. And so it tells us the things we shall do. So if you think we're ever not doing some of these things, you should hold us accountable and you should tell us that. And we are constantly trying to improve and evolve the program. And it tells us the kinds of things we should be providing technical assistance and advice on. And so that this is why we focus on the things that we focus on, and that sometimes that it might not 100% make sense. But I think if you read through this, it will make sense. And then we try and adjust how we do these things to best meet needs as we find them locally, as you inform us. So we need your participation to run the best program that we can possibly run. And then it also talks about the kinds of things that we can fund. We have broad granting authority, even to the point where other categories of projects. So it's pretty broad. If we can advance urban forestry by doing it, then we can consider doing it. And so I just want you to be aware of that enabling legislation. And hang on one second, I've got to move that. Okay. I thought I'd show you our, as Igor indicated, not particularly attractive website. We don't have much control over that. Our department doesn't even have much control over that, unfortunately, but you will find a lot of useful information there. Publications on taking care of trees during drought. Our granting information can be linked here. Just a brief description of our program and some of the partners that we have. And then you can find information about our Urban Forestry Advisory Committee. You may know that we advertised for some of the positions fairly recently within the last 6 months, and we have new members. You can find information about what the purpose of the Urban Forestry Advisory Committee is, and then the strategic plan that they developed for us, which I think is important to also see. This gives us some additional marching orders on how to achieve some of those things that are laid out for us in the Urban Forestry Act. So, and you can see who the CUFAC members were, and there's some familiar names like this guy, and this person you may be familiar with, and you may also be familiar with this guy down here. So some of these people that you have dealt with, and this guy as well, who you'll be hearing from shortly. So at any rate, you'll see that we have 3 overarching goals with a number of objectives associated with each, and then some recommended strategies. And so, so please take a look at that and let us know if we're not doing enough to meet some of these goals, objectives, and strategies. That's what we depend on the CUFAC for, the Urban Forestry Advisory Committee, and we depend on you as well. So please do let us know that. Some other kind of statewide policy documents that I think you may find useful and interesting as you do your local work that you can cite as, priorities of the state. The Forest Carbon Plan, goal number 3.5, protect and expand urban forests. Now, I'm not going to say that I had a lot to do with that, except that I wrote it. And so we do participate in a lot of these statewide policy and planning documents and try and interweave urban forestry considerations into them, because that's how things happen. While many of these aren't prescriptive to local governments or to local entities, they can refer to these as general direction from the state on, kind of what best practices are, or how to achieve certain things, or how they can participate in helping to achieve the state's goals. And so I won't get into that, but so Forest Carbon Plan, goal 3.5. Safeguarding California is the state's kind of climate adaptation strategy, climate resilience strategy, if you will. It's in the process of being revised again, but you can see here, objective F5, continue investing in urban forestry to enhance in the health of current urban forests and expand urban tree canopy statewide. So again, we had an active role in developing that as the state's lead for urban forestry and urban greening. And then finally, a slightly older document that is also currently being revised, the state's extreme heat guidance, which is a hot topic right now as we try to adapt to climate change. Again, promote and expand urban green and use of green infrastructure as part of cooling strategies in public and private spaces. And again, we're noted as lead agency because in the Public Resources Code, which you saw before, we are the lead agency for doing that. And so you'll see many of the things you've been talking about today listed here. And so these are things that can help you as you try to move forward in your regional collaborative and at your local level. And I'm going to stop sharing now. If I can figure out how to do that. Nope, I don't want to do that. All right. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about what Jimmy mentioned earlier, which is the 10 million early action funding. We're ready to award projects, or not award projects, but to invite back project applications with that 10 million. However, we're pausing because we expect budget news any day on how much, if or how much additional funding we may be getting through the what they call the Budget Bill Junior process, which is there were aspects of the state's budget that they chose to delay for further debate, and that has been ongoing, and we're near resolution on that. And so we do expect to receive some additional funding to the 10 million. And since that is imminent, we will likely be going deeper into our list of applications to invite back project proposals, but we have to wait and see what that final number is. Additionally, there is additional potential pots of funding that may be made available to us as part of that process over the next 2 years. We don't know exact amounts on that yet, or 100% that will occur. Those debates are still ongoing, but we do monitor that, and we will be prepared for whatever that outcome is to deliver that funding as best we can to support your local efforts. And I think I would also talk a little bit about our relationship with the federal government through the U.S. Forest Service. You were introduced to Miranda Hutton earlier today, and we work very closely with her and her program to deliver some federal funding in the state. And the only way that we do that in a way that you can interact in is because it supports things like our CUFAC and some of our operations and one of our personnel. But there's also typically some funding for priority projects, which are things that we look at the big picture on developing tools that can help you all do local activities better. If you are familiar with iTree planting, that was actually developed with a CalFire grant of federal funds in support of our greenhouse gas reduction fund projects early in that process, and then became part of iTree planting later. Things like the statewide urban tree canopy cover data that is available out there. These are the kinds of things that we typically fund with that, because it's not lots of money, but it is very important money with some flexibility that we can help increase capacity in the state and provide tools and data to people so that they can better accomplish what they're doing at the local level. So if you have ideas for projects, we can pretty consistently accept those as like a one-page document with just an idea of what it might cost. Doesn't have to be anything. We're just always looking for ideas for ways to increase capacity at regional and statewide level. So with those funds, it's really not a competitive process, but we're always looking for ideas. And we weigh those on how we can benefit the most people with those funds and how we can advance urban forestry in the state. And finally, I think I would just talk about that grants are just one tool that we use. So even if you're not receiving funding from us, that doesn't mean we're not available to you to help you with your local efforts. Either, oh, there goes surprised I didn't get a howl out of the dog on that one. But they're just one tool that we use. So make sure you do. So of course now, but just make sure you reach out to us. We can help you. We have great flexibility in being able to advocate for good local policy, to assist you with developing it, to help you with urban forest management plans and inventories, as far as best management practices, even, with or without funding. So we can help you with all of these things in one way or another, even if you're not successful in achieving a grant. So please do reach out to us on how we can best help you. And if we don't have the resources necessary, we can probably put you in touch with another entity that does, because that's one benefit we have of working at the statewide level, is seeing what everybody's doing and what's working and what's not, and then trying to match folks up on how, different ways that others have achieved success. So I think I'll go ahead and leave it at that, since we've been running over time. I'm certainly happy to answer questions when the time comes.
All right. Thank you very much, John. Fantastic presentation. And, having seen John in action, having seen Jimmy in action, before and by this I mean speaking to local city councils, agencies locally involved, their involvement really can make a difference in moving the urban forestry issue from something that's very much a back burner for a city council to something that they all of a sudden are a bit more interested in paying attention to. So just kind of keep them in mind, and not just in terms of grants, but really in terms of somebody who can move your conversation forward. Anyway, just a thought there. Okay, well, we're going to move from John to Walter. Walter, I think, doesn't need an introduction from our local standpoint, because Walter was the city forester for Palo Alto, but Walter is now the state urban forester. So I will turn it over to Walter Passmore, and I will have Walter introduce himself a little further, because that was a little too brief. So take it away, Walter.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It was supposed to be good morning, but we're a little over the agenda, so I'm going to try to be brief. I am going to talk a little bit about my own experience as a way to promote a quiet revolution against traditional urban forestry management approaches. And this group, the Santa Clara Urban Forestry Alliance, I think is one way that we go against the traditional approach and think about something new, as far as how can we work together to develop new funding mechanisms, new policies, new approaches to be more effective with our urban forest management. I also want to talk about the fact that we can act on multiple issues simultaneously. So as I present the ideas for local government, think about what areas that you can interact with. And I do want to say that this is going to be basically building blocks for a successful program. Urban forestry is a long-term endeavor. So think about which of these building blocks that you can put in place now and which you can introduce as ideas that are implemented at a later date. So Igor mentioned that I was the urban forester for City of Palo Alto prior to taking the role as the state urban forester. And a lot of the ideas that I'm going to propose to you were things that we implemented in Palo Alto. And I think they are building blocks of a successful program. I'm also going to comment on some of the other positions that I held in comparison to Palo Alto. So building block number one is city ownership responsibility for trees. This could also be county ownership or responsibility. So any government entity can take responsibility. Now, San Francisco had a really good example of what happens when those responsibilities are assigned to the adjacent property owner, and why we need to transform that thought process. It's to have consistent maintenance, expert inspection, overarching public benefit, and management of risk associated with those public trees. Street trees, park trees, trees at our public facilities. These are basically the building blocks of urban forestry throughout the city. Previous position, when I was the urban forester for Austin, Texas, I would tell people that the street trees are the largest park in the city that is the closest access for everyone, because everyone has a street tree in front of their home, whether you live in an apartment, a townhouse, a standalone residence. The street trees are what we interact with the most frequently. So to assign that to individual property owners results in unequal access. And especially in disadvantaged communities, people are less able to care for those trees with professional resources. So those trees are neglected, those trees suffer from that neglect and do not provide the benefits that are due to the residents in those communities. So that's a really important building block. And I know there's a lot of communities that do not have that public management of street trees and park trees, but it's something that every community needs to consider. Another building block, this is a policy block that we implemented in the city of Palo Alto, is no net loss of canopy. It's a pretty simple concept, but one that is so meaningful. And if we approach every decision with the philosophy that we're going to have no net loss of canopy, we are going to build our urban forest over time. You recall in the presentation from City of San Francisco that their focus was on maintenance and removal, but they did not have the budget or the staff resources to plant. And so this type of foundational policy, no net loss of canopy, is so important, regardless if you're managing a big program like San Francisco or the tiniest program. It's a really simple policy to put in place, and hopefully you can infuse that in all of your decision making. Another building block is having cyclical maintenance and inspection. It needs to be introduced in some form so that every tree is inspected on a routine basis, not just when someone complains, but on a routine basis so that we can discern the health and condition of trees over time. Condition changes with things like drought, storm events, changes in watering for the adjacent property. So we need to have some kind of a routine inspection system set up. We also need to have the ability to do response maintenance. So I remember the presentation from San Francisco, they mentioned their 311 system. Every city needs to have some mechanism for people to report things that need to be corrected. And for the city to be able to document those requests and act on them in a timely manner. That leads to another building block, which is risk management. Controlling our liability is something that all governments are concerned about. Sometimes that concern results in decisions that are not in the best interest of the community. So we get so scared about liability that we fail to apply resources to managing the trees, which is really our best defense. Our best risk management approach is to have healthy trees. Going back to my experience in Palo Alto, we found there was a direct inverse relationship between the amount of maintenance and the number of limb failures. So the more maintenance that we did, the more frequent that maintenance and the more frequent the inspection, the fewer limb failures we had. It was never to the point where we could get limb failures to zero, because limbs fail on trees sometimes. But we found that there was a direct relationship where when our maintenance frequency and quantity was much higher, we had a much, much lower incident of limb failures. So again, the best defense against liability is to do good maintenance. Keep your trees healthy. And the same goes for the next building block, which is pest and disease. Keeping our trees healthy is the overarching best defense against pest and disease. I did see some comments in the chat also that people were concerned about native trees. And I would say that native trees are a really important component of our urban forest, one that we should have in our population, but we also want to promote diversity. So if we compare our urban forest now to the historic ecology that we had, we know that we cannot rely solely on native species to meet the diversity that will give us resilience against pests and diseases. So consider that when you're writing your management plans, when you're making decisions about species choices. What we don't want to see is a very short list of species that we plant consistently. We want a really diverse palette, because that's going to give us better resistance against pests and diseases. It's going to give more interest and greater benefits for our urban forest as a whole. Staffing and contracts, another building block. I think Palo Alto was unique in the fact that the urban forester had interdepartmental oversight of a number of programs. I think that is an aspirational goal for a number of cities, one that I would hope that people would consider as an idea or a goal to strive for, is that one technical expert is providing oversight for a multitude of programs. So in Palo Alto, the urban forester position oversaw public works, parks, utilities, development review, and a number of other programs, including commenting on our general plan, our sustainability climate action plan, parks master plan. So that's really an aspirational goal. And I know it might take community a long time to get there, but something to consider. Oftentimes government develops these departmental silos that act against the greater good of the community. So we need to break down those traditional bureaucratic barriers in order to do something that is in the best interest of the community that we're working for. Another building block is to diversify our revenue sources. So again, I'm going to go back to the example in Palo Alto. We had revenue coming in from our utility, from general fund, from interdepartmental transfer when Public Works did work for parks, or we had fee revenue from things like development review, which we wrote conditions of approval and approved permits. We had revenue coming in from capital improvement. We also had an in lieu fee. So if developers could not plant the requisite number of trees to achieve no net loss of canopy, they could pay into a forestry fund in lieu of planting some of those trees. We always would strive to plant the maximum number on the property, but the additional trees that could not be planted to meet the replacement requirements could be paid in lieu. So I think that's a valuable mechanism to establish a diverse funding sources. And then your program is going to be more resilient when city budgets are reduced in one area. Partnerships are very valuable. I'm really thankful for all the partners that were on this call. Partners like the nonprofit groups, California Urban Forest Council, Canopy were really vital in the city of Palo Alto being as successful as it was. Partners like Grassroots Ecology, which was mentioned in the Canopy presentation, Audubon, Sierra Club, California Native Plant Society are all really important advocates for your program. And hopefully, as you build out some of these ideas and try to implement them, you will involve all of these groups because they can be a really powerful voice in reaching the people that need to act on the ground, not just your city government, but also residents, businesses in the community can act on a lot of these ideas that you may want to promote. So that being said, I'm going to leave some time for questions. I appreciate everyone's attention. I'm really excited that this group has progressed as far and as fast as it has. I compliment you for all of your good work. Igor?
All right, Walter, excellent as always. Thank you very much. This is all super, super helpful. And I think getting that I've been writing down the building blocks. So fantastic. Yeah, we need to maybe formulate the building blocks into a handout sheet because I think it would be helpful. No. I mean, people can argue, but I think it'd be helpful to just have an overview for again, municipalities or agencies who are just starting out. Okay, so let us go to our final panelist. And Dorothy Abeda comes to us from the commercial arboriculture world, but Dorothy also has decades of experience in the municipal world. And really, without further ado, I know a lot of you are familiar with Dorothy. I will just turn it over to Dorothy and please take it away. And Dorothy, please introduce yourself a bit more because I didn't talk about your work with the Urban Forest Council and tree inventories and all that. So Dorothy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to try to put my PowerPoint up. Let's see how successful I am here. Tell me if you can see it. Of course not. There we go. Are you seeing my?
Yes.
Okay.
So full screen. All right. So slideshow.
Okay. Can you see everything okay?
Yes, we can. Go.
All righty. So here I am. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by taking 1 second. Everybody, Take a deep breath, stretch a little bit. We're almost done. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I am here to talk about operational capacity and specifically how you, cities or nonprofits, can increase your operational capacity by engaging with commercial tree operations. But first, I wanted to bring this one topic up about the definition of an arborist versus the definition of a forester. And I found this very simple definition just on the internet going through. An arborist specializes in the management of individual trees. So practitioners, those people that do the hands-on work, are working on individual trees. Whereas a forester, the definitions I found always pointed to the management of populations of trees. And the reason I bring this up is because although you may not specifically be trained to take care of individual trees, all of us here today are interested and are focusing on the management of the large population of trees in Santa Clara County, the regional population of trees. So we're all urban foresters. And I want you to remember that now and for the rest of your career, as long as you are managing, helping to manage, interested in managing urban forests, then you are an urban forester. So as an urban forester, we often engage with commercial arborists in order to get the work done, so to speak. I can't do everything, never could, never will be able to. So you engage with commercial arborists to help you get to your end goals. And there are 4 different kinds that are typically that we run across. One is the practicing arborist, or commercial arborist as it's usually called. Oh, figures. Sorry about that. And the practicing arborist, or the hands-on arborist, is trained in the practical art and science of caring for individual trees. They specialize in the physical nature of the physical care of individual trees. And so the arborists that we see in the field, climbing trees or in bucket trucks pruning, those are what I'm going to define today as your commercial arborist. Typically, those arborists, you want to see that they have an arborist certification through the International Society of Arboriculture, or that they are certified tree workers, which I found out the hard way when writing specifications requiring certified tree workers, that there aren't a lot of those guys around. And so that whole grant that Jimmy was talking about to increase jobs or help people get careers in green industry is really interesting to me, because I had a really difficult time finding certified tree workers to work on my projects. The other type of commercial arborist are your consulting arborists. And most of those consulting arborists focus on diagnostics, treatment, value, appraisal, tree risk assessment, things like that. And the lines are getting a little blurred between practicing arborists and consulting arborists. And often they trade off on those services that they provide. And of course, we've all probably run across the utility arborist that is highly trained in safety pruning around electrical lines and in managing vegetation along electrical lines. And then, of course, the municipal arborists that are more focused, and Russ forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, but they're more focused on tree care requirements, policies, and regulations for public trees. And each of these different specialties in commercial arboriculture have ISA certifications behind them that you should look for when you are looking to hire an arborist to help you with your project. So a commercial or practicing arborist provides a whole bunch of different services. And these are the kinds of services that you might need to get your projects done. One of my favorite examples of this is California Urban Forest Council and their planting program. California Urban Forest Council is a small organization. They don't have a lot of tree planting people. In fact, they only have 2. But they partnered with a commercial arborist firm who found a way to help with the grant, get the boots on the ground to get the trees planted, get the boots on the ground to do the outreach, and create an incredibly successful tree planting program for the HighSpeed Rail. All of these services are provided by practicing arborists: planting, pruning, tree removal. If you need these types of services to get to your goals in your project, then you need to be very specific about how you write the specifications for your project before you hire the commercial firm. From the back end of things in commercial operations, there's a whole lot of things that you can look for that I'd like to point out. When you look at hiring a commercial operation to help you with your project goals, you need to look at how they're organized and how they build their staff. Are they building staff that are well-trained? Are they providing training for their staff? And these are things that you can usually look for just in talking to the folks from the arborist operation. And they will tell you, yes, we have a rigorous training program or not. You want the best people on the job. You want the people that are going to be on the same page with you to get to your end goal. So these are just things for you to look for. And I'm going to just go through these very quickly because we are out of time. You have to make sure that they have a quality control mechanism. Make sure that you know who you go to make sure that you get your customer satisfaction. TCIA accreditation is always something good to look for, and certainly ISA certifications and qualifications among their staff. Licenses and permits, insurance and bonding. And the lines do get blurred between the commercial arborist and the consulting arborist, but oftentimes to get your projects done or to complete a grant, you need planting recommendations, pruning specifications, and all of these can be found either through the commercial arborist group or through private consulting arborists. And for me, the difference has always been that if you are consulting on a project, it might be a question of conflict of interest if you're also providing the services. So that's just something to think about. Partnerships are the way to go. I highly recommend that you talk to a lot of arborists before you choose a firm to help you with your project. And that is all I'm going to say. I hope that was quick enough and you have time for questions.
That was great, Dorothy. was great. First, I was scribbling notes furiously, and then at some point, I just started getting screenshots. So yeah, just I grabbed the slides, the commercial arborist specialties, the practicing arborist services versus the consulting arborist services. So again, for those of you who are just starting out or who are thinking about working with commercial companies, I think this was super useful. It's a super useful summary from somebody who has been on both sides of this relationship. And I think Dorothy speaks from immense experience. So we are like basically on time, which is fantastic. So just before we open up to questions, just a note from Chris that I think you people should see, which is if you need ISA units, CUs, please email Chris, and his email is in the chat. So please have a look at the chat for Chris's email address. And yeah, do we have any questions? There's no open questions. There's a bunch of answered questions. So please have a look at the answer questions because there were a bunch of interesting questions asked. So please have a look at that. And yeah, if there's anything else, I'm happy to take that up now. Anything, anybody?
And if we could, just before we do the questions, if I could just take one more brief second just to say, I hope this gives everyone an idea of the possibilities, potential, the resources that are out there that we can all share, and kind of an idea of what we can do. We need the participation though. We need the enthusiasm. We need people to take a look at the solutions that can be solved, to want to solve those solutions, to understand what urban forestry can do as far as public health, infrastructure, equity, recreation, just so many things that we can do for our communities with this. And I would encourage you, when you get that email from SCVUFA or from people trying to get that participation, please consider finding the time or sending someone that they can kind of get that message to the people that you work with. You will be hearing from us, and we hope that we can get this participation and get this project moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm not going to take up any more time. Just to say, if you don't know where to start, then SCVUFA is the place to start, because as you saw in these two webinars, there is a bunch of elements to urban forestry, and there's also a bunch of resources that are already out there available, just ready off the shelf. And there's also a lot of people, and we're very, very lucky in California. I think that's a fair thing to say, that we have a state agency that's really, really involved and really has been moving the entire conversation forward. So, you know, for those of you just starting out, think about what you need, and then think about what the resources might be. And if you're not sure, come to SCVUFA. These kinds of webinars, I hope, are phenomenally informative. And if there are things that you specifically are concerned about, and maybe we didn't have time to address, and for example, I'll give you an example, carbon accounting. You know, for a lot of people, it's like, oh, just saying those words gives me a headache. Well, you know what? Kelaine, who was one of the people that pioneered carbon accounting for regular people, does a pretty regular webinar for the California Urban Forest Council on what is involved. It doesn't mean you have to become an expert in it, but you will have, after listening to an hour and a half of Kelaine, you will have a pretty good idea of what's involved and how to do it, or if you don't want to do it yourself, how to get help doing it. And so you go from something that's totally mysterious to something where you can say, no, I can navigate the process. I know where to go for help. So please get engaged. Again, 1 hour per quarter. It is, I think, a reasonable time commitment. And just to thank again, Olivia and Sumner, the two Climate Corps interns who really moved this, who really made this meeting possible. And then of course, our twin mastermind, Naresh and Chris. And I will just leave it to Naresh to take us out.
Thank you. Well, Igor and all the participants and the panel here, I would like to thank. I think it's going to make more sense working together. We can really make a difference here, leveraging each other's resources, which has already been done, proven effective, adopt those and create and excel and make it better. And this is the right place to be. And this is what our hope is, that we will be able to bring the county all cities and other interest groups together and work together. Thank you. I appreciate all your time.
Thank you all. And with that, I think we can end this introductory series of webinars. So we'll hope to see you at future SCVUFA meetings. And thank you again for coming. And thank you to all of our panelists. Everybody was great. Everybody was informative. And I think we really have given everyone a good sense of what is involved and what's out there. So thank you very much. Thank you all.